So far in my series of ranked videos, Jeff has challenged me in many different ways. From putting me into a top 500 lobby to play against Defran and test my skills, to matching me with an idiotic Tobian one-trick to test my patience. If there's one thing I cannot complain about, it is a lack of challenge. But one thing that sticks out during these videos is the fact that it was always my choice. It was my choice to run Lucio into a double barrier composition. It was my choice to swap off Zenyatta despite doing really well on him. And it was my choice to queue for tank, well knowing the pain that this would entail. But what if that choice was to be ripped out of my grasp? I mean, don't get me wrong, on a more cosmic scale, I always have the choice to do one thing over the other. But sometimes that means choosing between an obviously bad and obviously better outcome. I can always be stubborn and choose to do the wrong thing, but so far I have never been pushed hard enough to be forced to make a choice that is outside my comfort zone. This episode is going to highlight my first placement match of the season, which immediately prepared me for a very challenging set of games. And on that note, make sure you are subscribed to not miss the next episode in which I'm going to finish these placements. We are so incredibly close to hitting 60 nice thousand subscribers, so if you want to make this meme of a dream become reality, you know what to do. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not waste any more time because our story today takes place on Watchpoint Gibraltar. Now, this is one of those maps where my heroes of choice are predominantly dictated by my experience. Meta comps and pocket picks aside, I have an abnormally high win rate playing Zenyatta on this map, meaning I was very much looking forward to indulging my one-trick urges. Which makes it ever the more awkward that Miron insta-locked my main right out of the gates. Of course, I did what every EU player would in my situation, which is refusing to use my microphone and instead choose another character that I can proceed to lose the game on. Okay, it wasn't quite so straightforward. I am a man of reason after all, so I tried to highlight the fact that Zenyatta is my only good hero, which my team didn't seem to particularly care about. Thankfully, Miron ended up having mercy on my soul in more than one sense, because just when the game was about to begin, he swapped to the Winged Goddess to allow me to play my main. While we used the first couple seconds of the match to swap our composition, our Tracer got immediately dunked on by the opposing Ashe, reminding me that this was indeed a 3900 lobby. But they weren't the only one about to become very intimate with the decor of our spawn room, because the defenders were setting up a dive on me specifically, which, much to absolutely nobody's surprise, I would fall victim to. Within the first 20 seconds of the match, the blue team had completely annihilated our lineup, and I started to have a sneaking suspicion that this match would be ending my map-specific win streak. Our second attempt was not looking much better either. With the high ground under their control, the defenders could choose to engage us in any which way they please, and our approach to what we called a team fight was so incredibly disjointed that they had no trouble sending us packing. I really wish that third time was the charm, but I ended up eating a dynamite that was meant for somebody else, followed by a headshot that might as well have hit my chest and still came out with the same result. But I was not done suffering just yet. You can tell at that point that I was getting rather paranoid in regards to what was going on behind me. I got dove off enough to feel the sting of helplessness deep in my bones, but more than anything, I was really trying to finally get rid of that stupid rodent that got away with murder way too often. But just as I was about to finally put an end to his tyranny, the enemy Zenyatta blew Transcendence just for the sake of keeping him alive. You can guess how that exchange ended for me. Now, you may look at my Sigma's request to swap to Brigitte and think that's the reason I didn't get to play my main, but that really wasn't it. Wrecking Ball on his own is already a ridiculously overtuned character to the point where if you don't see how busted he is, you're probably actively trying not to see it. However, considering the fact that their dive setups have been well coordinated, on top of the unfortunate reality that his team is willing to blow ultimates just to keep him alive, don't be mistaken my friends, this hamster has forced my hand. Speaking of hamsters, while we were sorting out our compositional issues back in spawn, our Hammond, together with our Tracer, was very active in the enemy backline. As much as our previous pincer attack attempts have not succeeded, this time our flankers managed to give me the opportunity to establish the brick differential. Simultaneously, my Tracer made the enemy Zenyatta follow suit, and while they got one-tapped once again, that wasn't something Miron on Mercy can fix after having blocked the enemy Ashe. Spike, meanwhile, was trying to get the cart moving, because all these eliminations aren't gonna mean anything if we can't secure distance on the payload. It is unfortunate for him that the enemy Genji decided to dedicate his entire ultimate to the elimination of our main tank, but considering the losses that the lineup had to sustain up until that point, this wouldn't be enough to get us to retreat. As a matter of fact, we decided to double down on our offense, and where previously I had to keep my head on a swivel to avoid getting eliminated, all I had to do now was periodically hit an enemy to keep not only myself, but also my teammates alive. It is crazy how a single hero swap can make an entire team appear as though they're completely different players, but with that newfound sustainability fueling them, the hope of us avoiding the embarrassment of getting full health on the first point began to rise. But before we can set our sights on bigger accomplishments along the lines of victory, let's not forget that our success was the result of a single misplay by the defenders. And the second point is notorious for being difficult to capture, so let's see if we can keep up the pace. Despite me having spent more time in the spawn room than on the objective, we somehow succeeded in capturing the first point. Needless to say that now, as much as during the last season, I felt horribly misplaced competing around 3900. While I was having trouble staying alive, the rest of my team was putting their skills on display whenever possible, on whatever heroes they chose. I mean, don't get me wrong, I willingly swapped to Brig time and time again, but there's definitely something to be said for a hero being less fun when you get forced onto them versus you making that decision. But when my choices are to either never leave my spawn or actually participate in the match, it is a bit of a non-choice after all. At least we can rest assured knowing that the objective time gold medal is gonna be firmly in my hand. Wait a second, why is nobody on the objective? Okay, so as it turns out, just playing Brigade isn't the magic bullet that I believed it to be, because if you're playing in a rank high enough where people understand to make use of the geometry around them while playing on a high ground heavy map, it is actually not all that easy to get value out of her as the enemy team decimates your comrades. Fittingly enough, Mercy and I were the only survivors, though that left me to try and figure out how I can play around all of that high ground during the next team fight. Needless to say that this was a problem that occupied my entire team. As long as their Ashe is spamming down on us, we're gonna have a really hard time getting anywhere near the objective. It wasn't until Miron decided to go full battle Mercy that I could stop worrying about that problem, and can I just say how much I love his willingness to whip out the Glock in a 3900 match? Either way, with the sky under our control, all I had to focus on was not accidentally breaking my mouse as I squeezed down on the mouse one button following the usage of my ultimate. Just like last time, a single defender caught out of position was enough for us to snowball our way to victory. Our confidence levels were rising as we piled their bodies up high to create a stairway to heaven, a stairway that would also lead us to their fleeing Genji desperately trying to find out where he lands on the spectrum of fight or flight until he was finally released from his mortal vessel. Their Genji aside, the defenders were not entirely out of tricks though. Where there is high ground, there will be a hitscan player planting down their flag, and who needs a tank to contest the objective anyway when you can just summon Bob to do it for you? Despite all of that confidence that we displayed moments earlier, we had enough pattern recognition to understand that the proper response to a cascade of ultimates was the disengage action. Even without a team wipe, the defenders succeeded in breaking our momentum, which meant that we had to find an opening to get into position once more. But obviously, the blue team was learning of our habits and playstyle as well, allowing them to catch our Tracer out in the open. Solo ulting was apparently their solution to our shenanigans, because their Genji decided that he'd rather blow his Dragon Blade than allow me to get in position on the flank. They appeared to always have plenty of ultimates in their bank, no matter how many of us ended up getting nuked, which is remarkable considering the fact that we weren't even running a Roadhog. I think it goes without saying that with us losing so many teamfights so unbelievably quickly, the mood in our voice chat was beginning to tilt.
Are we gonna use rally today or?
Now there are a lot of things I could have said about that comment, not the least of which was the fact that I didn't have rally online until a Sigma and Mercy had already bitten the dust. But honestly, I wasn't feeling very talkative that day, and as much as I was tempted to reply in typical EU fashion, I caught myself before slipping towards the dark side once more. Either way, with only 10 seconds left on the clock, we were obviously running out of time, but the real question now was if anyone could even get to the objective to trigger overtime. Reviews ended up being our trump card more than once. Him touching the objective kept us in the game for the moment, but despite getting hunted and pushed around by the enemies, he succeeded in re-triggering overtime before slamming onto the high ground to rid ourselves of the enemy Ashe in this final team fight. He has given us every chance to succeed, and now it was our turn to take this opportunity. At that point in the game, I had absolutely no idea which team truly deserved to take home the victory. With a whiplash-inducing amount of back and forth, it appeared as though this was anyone's game to take. Honestly, the enemy team seemed to perform much more consistently than us, but every time they made a mistake, we were right there to take advantage of it in sweeping fashion. This game had taken an unexpected turn from nearly getting full health at the first point to capturing the last one in overtime. Now I can't wait to find out which playstyle is going to reign supreme on the next round. Whether we survived thanks to dumb luck or if there was actual merit to our abilities was about to be put to the test. By the end of the last round, the defenders had already adjusted their playstyle to combat us more effectively, and obviously we wouldn't be able to rely on the overtime respawn advantage now that it was our turn to defend. Either way, I wasn't about to leave it to chance, so in order to improve our team's morale, I decided to apologize for something that I hadn't messed up in the first place. But that complaint aside, I could feel that I was not firing on all cylinders last round. I don't know if the constant back and forth had just made me give up subconsciously, seriously or if I was struggling because I couldn't play my main. But either way, fate waits for nobody, and as such, the second round will begin. Contrary to the blue team's opening shot, we decide to begin our defense very slowly. I mean, if any of our DPS had the ability to one-shot somebody out of nowhere, then I'm sure they would have done it last round, so more than anything, we had to play carefully. While we tried to hold onto the high ground with most of our team, Reviews had to stall out the cart and disrupt the enemies to make sure they couldn't just have their way. Our approach may not look very cohesive at first, but the blue team actually had a lot of trouble finding an opening. Sure, a couple eliminations were being traded, but over the long run, we were on the winning side of this war of attrition, causing them to retreat. And that was exactly what we were waiting for. As soon as they made the decision to turn their backs on us, our flankers began running after the team to catch as many of them as possible. Miron also went on the offensive to prove that him glocking the blue team last time wasn't just a fluke, but actual part of his playstyle. Honestly, whoever said that Mercy's ultimate is boring to use has probably never seen this man play, because he knows how to make use of her unrivaled mobility. Obviously, their team was not happy about getting shoved back into their spawn like that, and their Genji in particular was itching to go in to reclaim his honor. But there was no ground for them to gain. Our Hammond blocked off the objective while I used Rally to close in on my Hanzo and help him deal with that Dragon Blade. But little did I know that August didn't need the help, schooling the opposing Shimada first with his bow and then with the bag. Of course, just one elimination was not going to win this team fight, but us not crumbling under the weight of an enemy ultimate was a good start to this engagement. Though we did have some miscommunication that caused us to expend our entire bank of ults in response to a single Dragon Blade, which, while winning us this fight, is going to leave us barren for the next one. Now, I wish I could tell you that the enemies did not take note of the fact that we wasted every ultimate in the game and then some, but of course they were perceptive enough to pick up on that, and well, yeah, no, we didn't get to fool them. But things got so much worse, because on top of losing the objective, we also lost every single player on our team who was unfortunate enough to get a bat spawn. If that ain't the snowball waiting to happen, then I don't know what is. But to make the prophecy become reality, the enemy Hammond snuck up into our spawn to make sure he can stagger anybody he can catch off guard. When their diva tossed a bomb into us and we all had to make a choice between walking forward or backwards, most of us made the sensible decision to rush past it. Unfortunately, Miron's knowledge would be his downfall. He was the only one that saw the enemy Hammond sneaking about, something he was very vocal in voice chat about, and that created a level of indecisiveness in his movement that would cause him to be the only one left in our spawn ready to be camped. As a Zenyatta player, I really did feel for Miron in that moment, but we had an objective to stop, and all of us turning around to deal with a Hammond that, let's be real, we weren't gonna be able to eliminate anyway was exactly what they wanted. As the only surviving support, it was my duty to keep our teammates alive, playing aggressively enough to keep triggering my Inspire, but conservative enough to stay alive so that I can continue triggering it. Our Tracer had been playing the long game, setting up a wide flank while waiting for us to engage, and that patience would pay off big time as he started terrorizing the enemy backline. We may have lost our Mercy, but the blue team had a full plate of flankers to deal with who were all perfectly capable of playing with a minimal amount of healing. This was the first time that I felt like we won a teamfight on the merit of our skill and decision making over just exploiting enemy misplays. And honestly, I was feeling pretty good about this. We completely reset the fight, we had controlled the high ground, and we even had some ultimates left for the next engagement. I mean, heck, our Tracer really warmed up their gameplay throughout this match to become a royal pain in the butt for the enemy backline. And let's not forget that Miron is a Zenyatta player in disguise, ready to pull out the Glock in a moment's notice before returning to his support duties. For once, it wasn't us constantly returning to the spawn room as we continued to bleed time off the clock, and don't even think for a second that we were done pressing our advantage, because as it turned out, our Genji had a plan.
Damage me next fight I have played.
Yes, sir. I mean, yes, daddy.
Okay, now that is on the list of things that I didn't need to hear, but anyway, let's take a look at the execution of this plan from my point of view.
Wait, where's 6k buddy?
Oh, no, you can't get 6k with Dragon Blade. You get 1 kill.
Oh, okay.
As much as I was happy about the raising of spirits that was taking place in our voice chat, I'm saddened to report that 1 kill was indeed not enough to win the fight, and the blue team came back swinging to eliminate everyone that pushed up to support that Dragon Blade. But hey, at least we had fun, right? While half of us were busy goofing around, our Tracer continued to put himself in overdrive, frying the enemy backline even as we were losing the point. Unfortunately, all good things eventually have to come to an end, and in this case, said end came in form of a respawning Hanzo, who himself appeared to be confused about having landed that shot. With less than a minute left on the clock, the game started to become all about speed and momentum, and since the flank was currently not occupied by our dead flankers, the enemy Tracer found an opening to style me back into my spawn. We couldn't afford to take this lightly any longer, so as soon as my teammates respawned, they began tossing their ultimates on the objective to keep us in the game. Reviews was very intent on collecting any staggered elimination he can get his grubby paws on, and while he eventually succeeded in his mission, he wouldn't live to tell the tale. I'm not sure if their Mercy using res and spawn was a good or a bad thing at that point, but whatever the case may be, the one thing that was obvious was that this fight wasn't over. A rally would be answered with a rally of our own, and much like during our offense, the blue team had to take this game into overtime. What followed was absolute chaos on the objective as everybody hammered down on their keyboards with reckless abandon. But amidst the mayhem, our Tracer continued to find value by utilizing surgical precision. Precision which the enemy D.Va needed none of. While the ultimate failed to find any eliminations, it did create space for the blue team to inch their way forward towards the last capture point. That same D.Va was also responsible for pushing me into a Dragon Strike, so you can imagine the colorful vocabulary that I was currently running through in my head. I was amazed by the pace at which everyone in this lobby was able to charge their ultimates, continuously smashing them down onto and around the objective. This final fight created nothing short of anarchy, but if the track record in this match is anything to go by, you know that this is the kind of environment in which my team shines. And as such, I am happy to report that at the end of this double-digit death count torture of a match, it was my team that ultimately took home the victory. Now, if all you have seen from me are the videos I'm uploading, you might be fooled into believing that I am winning the vast majority of my games. But don't be mistaken, I lose matches of Overwatch more than I lose my motivation to go outside. The only problem is that, and many of you are going to be able to attest to that, losses can often feel very underwhelming. A Doomfist one trick here, a main tank diff there, and really nothing that'll be worth telling a story about. But if you were ever in doubt about that little factoid, let me put you at ease, because the placement match track record does not lie, my friends. I do, in fact, lose a lot of my games in Overwatch, and if you've been keeping up with the series during the last season, you'll know that this was inevitable. I kept on bringing up the fact that the matchmaker falsely placed me in a rank that is too high on pretty much every role on all of my accounts, simply due to the fact that your hidden matchmaking rating does not appear to decay even after years of inactivity. There was no way I could continue being so lucky as to getting carried time and time again. Of course, that doesn't mean that losing doesn't suck. I mean, granted, playing at 1 in the morning wasn't the greatest idea I ever had, but maybe this was my brain subconsciously trying to lower my skill rating because I felt guilty about constantly ending up in top 500 lobbies. Or maybe this was just me trying to chase an upload schedule that is seemingly impossible to maintain with how long these freaking videos take to make. You be the judge of that. Either way, only because I deserve to lose does not mean that the rest of my team does, and as such I always try my hardest to win, even if that means putting me in even higher ranks that I have an increasingly difficult time competing in. So by Jeff, I will not end my placements on yet another loss if I can help it, which brings us to today's episode. Ladies and gentlemen, our story today takes place on Ilios. Now, Ilios is one of those maps that I often find myself struggling on. This game mode in particular is all about fragging out, which is great for anyone who wants to flex their mechanical skill. But for team players like me who lack that explosive sort of carry potential, it often ends up giving me trouble. Keeping that track record in mind, I may have started the game off on Brig, but don't worry my friends, I'll come to regret that decision in no time, meaning we won't be staying on that hero for long. Of course, this wouldn't be Ilios Runes without both teams running a Widowmaker, and if you are anything like me, the sound of fully charged Widow shots is the thing that your nightmares are made of. My Hammond, on the other hand, was willfully unimpressed by that and decided to engage in a staring contest with the opposing hamster rather than trying to pressure that Widowmaker. Considering our rather unorthodox composition and playstyle, I was suddenly left to assume the role of main tank, and I don't think I need to tell you what happens when the smaller hammer gets to meet the big one. While most of us were busy getting our faces smashed into a pulp, our Tracer was busy running circles around the enemy backline. I gotta say, even as a Zenyatta main, I am happy about seeing Tracer played more often, and even more so seeing her being played well. But unfortunately, without a solid tank lineup holding the front line, the couple picks that our Tracer collected wouldn't matter as the enemy Widowmaker continued to lay into us without a care in the world. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of the energy that is currently on display here, but I'm not sure that my Tracer and Hammond realized that the point they were trying to stall was already under the control of the blue team. My Zarya had since made the swap to Reinhardt, but our high mobility friends continued to get staggered while we were busy walking back to the point, which created a very awkward and very long period of time in which we were just kinda standing there. You can tell how little respect their team was giving us because the enemy Hammond was very nonchalantly vibing up on high, knowing we couldn't effectively stop him even if we tried. But even after we finally regrouped, it was rather obvious that the enemy team was having the upper hand. Everyone on our team who decided to take their individual matchups ended up losing them, while our Reinhardt had trouble even getting on the objective thanks to an uncontested Zenyatta that melted him as soon as he dropped his barrier. Being the team player that I am, of course I was standing by his side, keeping him alive even in the face of a team that was mercilessly laying into him. But unfortunately, we bled so much much manpower that it was only a matter of time until a puny little frontline followed suit. Every elimination we collected now was worth less than a consolation prize, while the price of admission to enter the frontline was our ability to regroup. And make no mistake, our voice chat was absolutely on fire during this match, but where I would hope for concise callouts, instead all my team had to offer was a collection of how did we lose this, in addition to the bickering about one another's hero choice. It should come to absolutely nobody's surprise that this lack of cohesion, as well as our poor planning and execution, ultimately cost us this round. And if you have seen the last episode, you might remember that during that session, I was not much in the mood of talking, though considering the fact that I was tired of losing, I began warming up to that idea.
The brig, can you go on? Nice.
Rush like Ilios or something.
Yeah, I think that might be better.
Oh, see.
So
Go
what now?
right. Go right.
Come. We'll swap if needed.
Now, I'm not entirely against the idea of playing either Ana or Lucio, but what bugged me was my team's indecisiveness. If we want to win this game, it matters less which characters we play and more how we play them. Though with that said, I would lie if I claimed that I wasn't enjoying getting to play Ana in a competitive match again. Some of you might not know that, but way back in the day, Ana actually used to be my main before I slowly transitioned away to becoming a Zenyatta one-trick. Anyway, it didn't seem like the enemy team was expecting our compositional change, and as much as I had to warm up on Ana before being able to clutch out any amazing plays, pumping ungodly amounts of burst healing into my teammates was apparently doing the trick to allow us to count ahead in the first teamfight. More importantly than that, our voice chat was finally being used for its original purpose of calling out things that mattered over just complaining all the time. Seeing as how they lost in a direct confrontation, the blue team decided to go for a bit more of a poking approach prior to committing to a teamfight. But contrary to the last round, we actually had a game plan.
You give me Nana this fight.
Wait, who's me?
Run. Can you give me?
Okay. The plan in itself wasn't horrible, except that I shouldn't have tried to cross over to the right side in an attempt to maintain line of sight to my tanks while denying LOS to the enemy McCree. Where you would usually expect a nano-boosted Reinhardt to absolutely tear through the enemy team, it was less about the damage boost it gave him and more about the damage mitigation, as Tactical proceeded to soak every single cooldown the enemy team had available. But while he did so, Alpha could use all of that space to destroy the opposition as though he was the one that was just given that nano boost. It really comes to show how much a DPS can do when given the opportunity, and it also shows how dysfunctional our tank lineup was in the previous round versus now, where our McCree could just casually walk all over the enemy team thanks to their performance. Though I am a wee bit jealous over the fact that the blue team immediately knew to avoid getting staggered, while our team had to lose an entire round to understand that concept. I wouldn't blame you for thinking that this is an entirely different match with entirely different players, where previously nobody said anything of value in voice chat while recklessly diving into the enemy backline. We were now discussing how to handle the enemy's next move while calling out every single cooldown and mistake we can spot. But as much as it may appear on the outside as though we are absolutely schooling the enemies this time, I can assure you that everyone on our team was on high alert. Reloading. Right enter.
Right one.
Here's one of the many reasons why playing ranked has been such a challenge for me. Sometimes my ISP just randomly decides to stop delivering on the service that I pay them for, and that is more tilting than any Torbjorn one-trick I could ever end up with in my game. Either way, lag spikes aside, our team continued their domination from start to finish on this round, which left me a bit confused. If the blue team absolutely stomped us on the first round, and we absolutely stomped them on the second one, does that mean the third one is going to be really close? Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. After two very one-sided rounds of Overwatch, Ilios well will be the deciding map on which we finally settle our score once and for all. And as much as I was very tempted to swap to Lucio, our team really seemed to need the burst healing potential that Ana can deliver, meaning it wasn't me who swapped the hero. As long as we are on the same page about our game plan, I was certain that we could take home the victory, though we swiftly realized that the enemy team was not going down without a fight.
There ball. Let's swap the seat. Right, chill.
You want hide?
Mine.
I'm dead.
The enemies really just kicked it up a notch right from the get-go. This initial victory did not come without its sacrifices, and it appeared as though they were getting better at focus firing, which put a lot of pressure on me specifically. We have gained initial control of the capture point, but I was immediately worried about the adaptability their team had put on display. Also, I'm not saying that we're not a tracer kind of team, but let's just agree that this has not worked out all that well the first time around, and, well, the enemy Ashe definitely hurt them zip around the backline, much to our detriment. Of course, the enemies would try to make use of that early pick, giving me ever more things to worry about. I gotta reload. I got Nana.
We have nade. Okay, we kill Nano.
Gimme, gimme.
I'm back in one. I'm gonna.
I'm down. Joanna's dead. Things were not looking great for us anymore. We won the second round because we started to play as a unit and stick together, but now our attention was split once again, and the enemy team had absolutely no trouble taking advantage of that. After only 40% capture percentage, we already lost control of the objective, and I can only hope that we don't fall back into our staggering habits. But it wasn't only the objective we lost control of, it was also the pace of the game. While we did manage to stage a cohesive attack, the enemy team had a solid answer for our push, and despite our best effort, we couldn't counter their countermeasure.
Go from inside and just speed out, okay, with B. Look for a grab here.
Let's go, I'm here.
Get the run.
The enemy team continued to overwhelm us not only with their ferocity, but also with their precision, because they always found ways to open up with a pick before splitting the rest of us in half to then begin the process of destroying us one by one. We just couldn't find an opening to enter the objective area without losing a player, let alone taking a disgusting amount of damage. In a sense, it really did feel like we were always playing at a man disadvantage, because none of our diving attempts ever worked out, allowing them to lay into us without a care in the world. But at that point, we didn't have time to swap heroes, much less our strategy. We had been on the stagger train once more, so just getting on the objective would require an act of desperation. Somebody has to touch you. We don't have ball.
Trace second.
I
We
can't
can go
touch.
on the right. Can we go?
Okay, I can. No, go me.
I'm still far.
I'm tight. Look for
I'm so far.
right side.
Can you nano me?
Who's me?
Run.
Nice.
Yo, Ryan the back. Enter. -1, punch him!
Still one touch, someone touch.
Good effort.
It's unlucky. Tried to
GG's.
grab him. Still grab him.
You know what happens. Well, I guess I was wrong. Despite my best 142 in the morning effort, I actually ended up losing every single place and match after my first. I just felt it was important to highlight that no, I'm not infinitely lucky, and I actually lose more games off camera than you probably assume. I was definitely frustrated not being able to clutch out the win on Ana, because it really hammered home the fact that I was more rusty on her than I was willing to admit. But hey, dropping some SR should be the silver lining, right? After all, losing most of my placements should at least allow me to play in a rank more suitable for me and my current skill level, so let's see where Jeff decided to place me. It barely made a dent. Well, if that doesn't illustrate just how pointless placement matches are, then I don't know what does. At this point, I'm very tempted to level up a new account just so I can return to my platinum brethren where I belong. But oh well, I guess that concludes our story for today. How much can you take before you are ready to call quits? It appears as though it doesn't take a lot to get Overwatch players to throw a hissy fit, at least judging by the amount of levers I come across on a daily basis. But granted, I too have suffered enough to often consider leaving matches, whether competitive or not, out of sheer frustration. It is difficult to blame people for doing so, because you never know how much BS was leading up to them eventually saying, it's enough. Overwatch has this magical thing about it where it is simultaneously creating some of the most enjoyable, tense, or funny PvP matches I have ever played, while also hosting some of the most mind-bogglingly frustrating exercises in anger management to date. I mean, heck, if you saw the last episode, then you just witnessed my most recent losing streak, as well as my desperate attempt of stopping it. Of course, not every loss is necessarily rage-inducing, but victory aside, there are a lot of things from heart counters to crowd control that can really tick somebody off. Funnily enough, some of my most annoying experiences in this game have ended with me winning. Not to try and tug at your heartstrings, but Zenyatta, by design, is not meant to survive every single engagement. And that means that whenever the enemies are determined to take you out, there often isn't anything you can do about it on your own. Now, if you have seen any amount of my ranked episodes, then you'll know that more often than not, I am very much willing to flex for my team. But every so often, I can't help but give in to my desire of just playing what I want. The problem is that me playing whatever my heart desires often creates a very violent response from the enemy team, as my performance on my main incentivizes them to counter me into oblivion. Today's story is one of bravery, perseverance, and an unwillingness to yield in response to my oppressors. No matter how much I get focused and how many enemies I'll get to swap their heroes, I will not get off Zenyatta, even if that means never leaving my spawn room. Ladies and gentlemen, our story today takes place on Junkertown. You can tell right from the get-go that we're in for a wild ride against those defenders, because of course they'd be playing Widowmaker on one of the best sniper maps in the game, but they are also going for an aggressive peek into our spawn room to start off the round. Of course, it is impossible to hide your disgusting odor when opening up with a sweaty play like that, allowing me to find and AOD them to make sure nobody gets taken out immediately. Something I couldn't do anything about, however, was stopping the stupid rodent from literally rolling up on our spawn doors and taking out my Ashe on high ground, because you know, that is something you should totally be able to do and get away with as a tank. Meanwhile, our own Hammond was proving that there are always two sides to a coin, and for every ball apologist that spawn camps a sniper, there's at least one who absolutely feeds their brains out when given the opportunity. Since our tanks didn't seem particularly interested in staying alive, much less escorting the objective, our Mercy McCree duo took up that responsibility, as everyone else was refusing to get near it as long as the enemy snipers were alive. Of course, my attempts of avoiding sniper sightlines by dodging the payload wouldn't make a lot of sense, so my first impulse was to find another angle to peek them without even bothering to try and duck after a butchered right click. At that point, Vitalize adopted a fine I'll do it myself attitude, taking up arms and marching onto the front line to create the space we needed to move forward. Of course, that eventually led to his demise, but naturally, our Mercy was there to the rescue. But just gaining ground wasn't good enough to win. We had to continue expanding our territory and hold what we fought for, but rather than aggressively taking angles to do so, our Ashe decided to take a chill pill in the bag, hoping for enemies to run into her crosshair while our team was getting annihilated by the opposing Widowmaker. It is worth mentioning that said Widowmaker was literally taking shots from our backline into our backline, which really speaks volumes for how perceptive our Ashe was. Sue was so oblivious that even after having been eliminated by the enemy Ashe and watching them walk into our backline, they still ignored that very same backline Ashe whiffing shots on them from behind before predictably solo-ulting them. Of course, I would have loved to help them, but I was currently busy getting spawn camped by the enemy Hammond. Refusing to believe that the slam hitbox was massive enough to reach me from so far away, I found myself regretting not popping Transcendence. This entire game was turning into a wash. Our tanks just kept feeding themselves into the grinder, our supports were getting spawn camped, and we only had one DPS player on our team showing evidence of their monitor actually being turned on. And the worst part was that our collective lack of perception meant that chances are nobody was even aware of any of these problems. And the fact that we continued to stagger onto the objective was definitely a testament to that. But alas, we weren't beaten just yet. The enemy Widow had made a swap to Hanzo and just taken out Vitalize, but since our spawn times coincided into 5 of us being here, I knew we couldn't waste this opportunity. Echo was getting predictable at that point, and I finally connected my volley with his face as he tried to flank from the same side again, equalizing this engagement and giving us an opportunity to strike back. The enemy Sigma made an attempt to stop us before we could gain ground, but that Transcendence that I refused to blow and getting spawn camp would now be what saves my team from complete annihilation. Of course, our Winston was nowhere near us, but the last couple seconds of my ultimate were enough to keep him alive for the time being. With us having stabilized, I entrusted the front line to the rest of my team while joining our Ashe on the flank. And what a flank we managed to pull off. My Discord supported body shots were softening the enemy backline up for Tsu to absolutely tear through them, finally taking an aggressive angle and showing how many hits they can click when there's no Hammond to stop them. That same Hammond had no choice but to desperately throw himself on the objective in an attempt of buying enough time for the rest of his team to follow suit, but at last, we had secured the first point. Now granted, my little flanking adventure during the last fight following my fight-saving Transcendence definitely put me on the enemy team's radar as a potential problem. And considering the fact that I had already been getting spawn camped multiple times in an attempt to capture the first point, my one-trick struggle was about to get much worse. But for the time being, I could enjoy the fact that we were the ones controlling the pace of the game, since the defenders didn't seem to be in agreement about whether they should recontest immediately or turn back to regroup. I realized by then that my Winston was playing rather recklessly, but I preferred that playstyle over them refusing to ever hit the W key, so the best thing I could do was melting the enemies away via Discord orb to allow him to stay alive. But again, only because we're winning does not mean I'm meant to stay alive, having to fend for my life against the enemy Hammond with the only thing keeping me alive being my godlike positioning and brilliant decision-making skills. Meanwhile, Vitalize was determined to keep the enemies on the stagger train by unapologetically flanking, and as much as some of you might be disgusted at the sight of a double fan the hammer play, as far as I'm concerned, the result justifies the means. Surprisingly enough, it was going well. A bit too well. Little did I know at that point that the enemy team continued to swap their composition to reinforce their target priority, and I was on their hit list. Echo was no longer satisfied with taking me out from afar, now swapping to Doomfist to get up close and personal, and of course I found myself taken out in an instant. There were two simple truths at play that cost us a second point cap. Number one was the fact that we somehow found a way to play split apart on the exact section of the map that is literally just a corridor, allowing the enemies to isolate and pick us apart. And number two was the fact that we should definitely be getting off Winston. Now here's the thing about me playing Zenyatta. Where many people believe that your only value comes from mechanical prowess, I believe in overpowering the opposition using my superior intellect. Their team was clearly out to eliminate me as quickly as possible, which means the rest of my team will be experiencing less pressure if I'm not part of the engagement. More than trying to hide from my counters, I was trying to pull them away from the rest of my team so they needed to use their cooldowns just to get to me. But of course, I wasn't intending to let them kill me without a fight. Hecko was predictably biting the bait I had carefully laid out, and at this point you might assume that his team had the upper hand because I just blew Transcendence. But they don't. Thanks to the myriad of wrinkles present on my brain, I had devised a counterplay for his attempted escape, which allowed me to forego my role as prey in favor of becoming the hunter. You can be certain that I savored every moment of what was clearly a victory made on the back of solid decision making over just relying on my mechanics. Now, as much as I would like to avoid sounding too cocky, even when just for comedic effect, that play literally opened up the second point for us. It is important to remember that when you are genuinely getting hard focused by the enemies, that is something you can use to your advantage. Vengeful players are often very predictable, and the more heat is on you specifically, the less the rest of your team is going to be pressured. Doomfist and Hammond were gunning for me all game long, so when they were out of cooldowns, my additional snipe on their second DPS was really all it took for us to get back on the objective. Of course, there was another desperate attempt at stalling, but once more, we would prevail. But I gotta be honest with you guys, when I was getting spawn camped at the first point, I was actually about to just alter for the game. But seeing how tight of a match I would have missed out on, I was really glad I didn't. I mean, with a total of 6 deaths to my name, I wasn't exactly having the time of my life. Okay, make that 7. Despite my sudden and unfortunate demise, my tanks continued to secure space up ahead to make sure that the defenders can't just walk all over us after we fought so hard for that last point. Thankfully, the payload hadn't advanced too far from our latest spawn and I could rejoin my comrades in no time at all. Granted, by this point in the game, I had realized that we developed something of a song and dance. After an initial struggle, we start dominating our way through the map until we are just shy of capturing before the enemies strike back. If that pattern continues, that would mean that we actually come out victorious by the end of it. However, considering the spawn advantage that defenders enjoy at the last point, I wouldn't bet on it. And let's not forget that part of that song and dance was vitalized going on the flank, of which the result seems to be determined by a dice roll. Though he successfully secured 2 eliminations with his Deadeye before getting eliminated this time, so I guess that's kind of a win-lose for once. Of course, the enemy Hammond wasn't done disrupting us, and after healing up on the Mega Health Pack, he decided to beeline it straight towards me in an attempt of ending my dominance. My prime directive was keeping my team as much as our momentum alive, so using Transcendence to clean up the minefield was a no-brainer for me. But what I didn't consider was the unfortunate fact that the hitbox of these explosives is bigger than their model, which resulted in our Mercy getting booed from one into another. Unlucky. As much as I want to say that our Winston was also determined to keep up our momentum, considering his track record, I am reasonably certain that him using his ultimate was a decision he made in sheer disregard of our Mercy's death. But it did force out Transcendence, which really is more than he got out of most of his primal rages so far. Needless to say that, yes, the theme continued and we got picked off one by one as our tanks left the squishies alone in sheer disregard for the current situation. The payload was left vacant once more, and all of our struggles leading up to this point had cost us a lot of time, which means we didn't have the luxury of taking it slow. We had to engage and do it fast. Our tank line fearlessly stormed onto the high ground to allow the rest of our team safe passage to the objective. Forcing the defenders off of an advantageous position would make for a great start to this final fight, and I was ready to give it my all. My low mobility self arrived late to the party, and of course I had to be wary of enemy flankers, though one such flanker presented themselves much sooner than I expected, ready for me to kick them in the face just before overtime hit, giving them a long spawn. Our tanks continued to do what they do best, which was running face first into the opposition in complete disregard for their own or anyone else's safety, but luckily for them, the rest of our team was there to clean up the mess. More defenders continued to stream out of the respawn gate as I rained Discord orbs of destruction down on them, and as much as their Roadhog made for an easy addition to my KDR, their Hammond was once again harassing my backline, just that this time he wouldn't get away with it. And as we are closing out this match on Junkertown, let me just say that I do read a lot of you guys' comments, and I saw that a decent bunch of you missed seeing quick play matches on the channel. I understand both perspectives, so ranked adds a lot of tension to the story as I put my skill rating on the line, but it is usually just very sweaty gameplay compared to the often silly things that can happen in quick play. I mean, heck, I definitely wouldn't have sat on Zenyatta all game long to be farmed like this because my teammates would have flamed me, and that rightfully so. Funny outplays like the one against Doomfist just don't often happen in comp because you have to play so much more carefully. What I'm saying is that there is room for both of these types of videos on the channel. As you have seen on the last episode, sometimes my ISP literally does not allow me to commit to ranked due to instabilities and outages, so quick play matches aren't just gonna vanish from our programming. Either way, I hope you guys still enjoyed the episode even if it wasn't ranked. And hey, feel free to leave your own 2 cents on the matter down in the comment section below.
Wait, Cliff, is that you?
Now, believe it or not, but I'm not what somebody would call especially popular. People recognizing me in-game isn't something that happens often, so whenever it does, it tends to become a bit of a highlight. I mean, some of you might think that me having 60 nice thousand subscribers means I get recognized all the time, but that isn't actually the case. In the grand scheme of things, I'm a small fish just kinda doing my own thing. Barely anyone in the space has ever heard my name, so trust me when I say that it really is a special thing to happen for me. More than anything, this match of Overwatch felt like all the stars aligned for me to make an episode about it. Me playing my main role in competitive play, Jeff blessing me with a beautiful side of King's Row, a viewer of mine on my team, and to top it all off, two teams that were determined to take home the victory in one of the most balanced displays of matchmaking functionality I've ever seen. That's right, my friends, this is one of those once-in-a-blue-moon games where the matchmaker actually did its job. Now, if it feels to you like I'm always doing my placement matches, that's because I kind of am. I had a bunch of technical issues that stopped me from playing the last month and a half, and between 3 roles on 3 different accounts, there's just a lot of placements for me to get through. It's not like I'm complaining though, placement matches are arguably the most exciting part of any ranked season, so here we are finding our place on the ladder once more. And that place, at least on the time being, was anywhere behind my tanks. My Reinhardt opted for the standard play of opening the game up by fire striking the enemy spawn doors. Said enemies were not very appreciative of that and decided to rush towards the objective with a ferocity that I haven't experienced in a while. But much to my surprise, the fight was over almost as swiftly as it started. Frankly speaking, I don't even know what happened. I just kinda backed off to stay alive and suddenly the enemies were gone. A team that plays so aggressively wouldn't be outdone by a single failed attempt, and upon respawning, Megumi put the Hanzo differential on display, which meant go time for the rest of the attackers. With the speed boost accelerating their advance, the red team immediately got in position on the objective, and once the Baptiste dropped their widescreen TV, there already wasn't much more we could do. Amplification Matrix is one of the most reliable zoning tools in the game, and no matter how we would try to go about recontesting, we'd be taking a fistful of damage in the process, and in this case, our retaliation paled by comparison. Alright, fine, so it didn't take long for us to lose the first point, but that's okay, there's plenty of distance to cover before the red team can claim victory and ample opportunities for us to recover. Thankfully, none of our low mobility characters were caught on bad spawn, which meant we could attempt to contest the objective rather sooner than later, but in order to achieve that, we needed an opening, one that I would be glad to provide by deleting the enemy Reinhardt with a volley. I was honestly surprised to find the red team back out so willingly as my tanks marched onto the objective, especially considering the level of aggression they put on display so far. But that should teach us that there's a difference between playing aggressively and playing recklessly, because the attackers were painfully aware of the fact that losing their main tank was reason to back out. As much as I was hoping to catch a break from the red team's relentless attacks, if there was one thing I had to give them credit for, it was the fact that they didn't lose any time. They came back faster than you could type easy in chat and once more attempted to crush us by using Amplification Matrix. But Rashid's deflect would turn their plan against them, which immediately opened up the opportunity for us to strike back. Our team fearlessly rushed past the Matrix to make use of our advantage, and before we knew it, we found ourselves in front of the spawn doors. As for me, I've been playing very defensively this entire round. While I am known for my overly aggressive support play, I felt like I was losing half my HP every time I turned a corner, and you can tell that this has impacted my play in a very negative way. Things were about to get much worse for me because the red team's repeated failure to win fights without ultimates prompted them to simply dump all of them into a single team fight, the resulting damage of which grossly overpowered the healing output that my Transcendence could provide. It was hunting season now, and apparently support players are high up on the menu. Though none of us managed to get away thanks not only to an overwhelming amount of damage but also a speed boost that helped them pick off the survivors. At this point in the game, something of a pattern had definitely emerged. The red team wasn't just aimlessly holding down the W key, because as far as individual matchups are concerned, we have the upper hand. But as we all know, ultimates can solve that problem. 2 can play at that game, however, so when our team respawned, we decided to show them who's boss with an almighty "Know You times infinity" that was bound to put them in their place. And after that proud display of color vomit all over our screens, the only one that remained was blue. You may have noticed that I swapped off Zenyatta by then, and that for a number of reasons. Seeing the red team's reliance on ultimates made one thing very apparent: the fact that Transcendence was not going to save us. And to top it all off, I was constantly eating so much damage that I could rarely use my Discordo to lead the teamfight. It was obvious that I still haven't devised a good counter strategy beyond I should get off Zenyatta, but Bionit is one of the most powerful cooldowns in the game, so at least there's that. But while I was busy trying to come up with a plan of attack, our DPS decided to overextend to Heck and beyond, which, as you can probably guess, made our previous investment of ultimates absolutely null and void. Our Zarya was trying to save herself and her charge after realizing that the second point was gone, but that doesn't mean they weren't ready to dish out some damage. If we want to avoid the stagger trend to spawn room city, we'd have to break the attackers' momentum before it's too late, and Poker was here to deliver. By the time our Reinhardt respawned, we had already done some serious damage to the red team, once again proving that, usually anyway, we'd be the ones coming out ahead in teamfights that don't involve the stacking of ultimates. We had thoroughly pushed the enemies back into their spawn once more, but this time things are going to be different, because we had finally devised a strategy to deal with their ultimate heavy playstyle. And that plan was to use even more ultimates. Okay, truth be told, the red team had one, maybe two different ways that they approached every single engagement, neither of which was particularly intricate. The whole idea we had was forcing them to commit to fights they'd rather back out of. So as soon as they invested in ultimate, we hit them with an early Uno reverse card to trigger them into wanting to back out, but of course it was already too late by then. Long story short is that the red team had become predictable. They were telegraphing their intent by always engaging us in the exact same way, which allowed us to strike back without giving them an opportunity to back out. Of course, knowing what's gonna happen is good and all, but none of that matters when your reaction does not prevent it. As much as we knew that the enemies were going to stack ultimates on us, our positioning was off, which allowed their Hanzo to cut our team in half by using Dragon Strike. Our prime directive was saving whoever survived our misplay, because Jeff knows if we're to get wiped right now, there's no way we can come back for a promising attempt of recontesting. My Zarya went as far as investing a Graviton Surge just to keep the red team from chasing us down, which definitely saved my life. When our Reinhardt returned to the front line, I figured we were in a reasonably stable position. However, my Zarya was yelling at me to nano him, which as a German, I'm very inclined to listen to. Ninja predictably couldn't do anything with the nano I gave him, as every single enemy player in sight simply walked away from it, and I can only imagine how frustrating that must have been for him. At this point, stalling the fight out into overtime was realistically our best bet. I did everything in my power to stabilize us, including landing a sleep dart on their flanking Hanzo, which Rashid had unfortunately woken up immediately. But there was no time to complain about it, because tensions were high and the next clash between our tanks could occur at any moment, putting me on edge. The seconds continued to tick down until eventually overtime finally triggered, which meant even if we don't hold this last point, we're still in a strong position as far as this match is concerned. The red team forced us into a corner with another amplification matrix, and it was in that moment that I became the victim of a shatter. You see, the thing with Reinhardt's ultimate is that even if you just take a single step forward, the stun effect is going to project momentum onto your character, which flings you in the direction you last moved. That put me in prime position to get eliminated, which in turn removed most of our survivability. It was an unfortunate, albeit avoidable way of losing our defense round. Dragging it into overtime was a bit of a saving grace, but of course, we wouldn't be satisfied with anything less than victory. Competitive matches that go back and forth as much as this one don't happen very often to me, but it was a welcome break from all the smurfs that I had to deal with up until that point. It is also worth mentioning that we are already halfway through this episode without me covering what is in the title, and that's because I was rather quiet in voice chat throughout our defense. My teammates were plenty talkative, but I didn't record most of it because they didn't say anything funny I could milk for content. So yeah, just YouTuber things, I guess. Point being, I was ready to support diff the red team into oblivion, which included a more active role in voice chat. But for how much I claimed that they were getting predictable, I sure as heck was not expecting them to make a swap to Doomfist, much less having them divert from their usual flankless playstyle. The ironic part is that you can see this brief moment of hesitation in my gameplay where I could clearly hear somebody sneaking about, but I literally thought to myself, oh, how bad can it be? Well, I'll tell you how bad it could be, because my callousness resulted in me deservingly getting one shot out of nowhere. And as much as I appreciated Mercy's effort of bringing me back into the game via means of resurrection, it was one of those reses that I really wish I could deny, because there was no way I was getting out in one piece. My team decided to continue their assault despite the fact that they lost their main healer twice, and I was immediately worried about us kicking off our offense with a massive ultimate bank disadvantage as a result of their decision. As a matter of fact, we never quite disengaged no matter how many players we lost. I mean, the spawn advantage was on our side, but it was a stark contrast from the clean engagement playstyle that the red team put on display. We certainly made an effort to get creative with our ultimates and positioning, but so far, the enemies definitely had the upper hand. Though it seemed like us refusing to disengage was really testing the red team's trigger finger, and at some point they couldn't resist pushing into us, which finally gave us an opening pick. We still did not completely regroup, but what we were lacking in numbers, we more than made up for with our sheer tenacity, as every elimination we obtained became increasingly more valuable. My teammates must have been absolutely sick and tired of being on the losing side of this match, causing them to, seemingly out of nowhere, smash down on the W key like there was no tomorrow. That recklessness that I initially thought the enemy team featured was now undeniably on our side, and somehow magically it worked out in our favor. Of course, somebody had to stay behind to capture the point, because that's kind of important in this game. As it turns out, yep, Very important. While I was making sure that we don't lose by default, the rest of my team had evidently thrown caution out the window as they continued to chase down the fleeing defenders with reckless abandon. The red team was very unfortunate to have gotten split spawn due to there only being one person who very slowly captured the objective, resulting in them inevitably getting staggered. I guess I can use this objective intermission to remind you to like and subscribe. Oh, also, if you're disappointed to see me have swapped off Ana, make sure you hit that bell icon, because next week I'm gonna be one-tricking Ana into a dive comp. You won't want to miss it. By the time the payload connected with my teammates in the front line, the next special effects cluster was already well overdue, and I could finally put on display why I made the switch to Baptiste. Essentially, we were already outplaying the red team during dry pushes most of the time, so by me swapping to Bap, I could give us a huge edge in surviving and countering the one thing they did really well, which was using ultimates. The red team was getting far fewer attempts at stopping the payload than we did on our defense because we refused to let any of them back out. Without the ability to regroup into clean engagements, it was obvious they began to struggle, though some of us may have gotten a bit overzealous and once again pushed in front of our tanks to inevitably become another statistic. For how much distance we covered in one fell swoop, it really appeared as though we were finally running out of gas. The red team's speed boost allowed them to build on their opening pick and chase us down, finally resetting the game in their favor. Is what I would say if my Zarya didn't refuse to let that happen once again. Despite Poco putting himself in lethal danger, he kept the teamfight alive and even used his graviton surge to make sure that a clean reset does not happen. In spite of the red team having every advantage on their side, our sheer ferocity managed to push them back as they somehow ended up respecting the fact that we continued to bark at them without any bite to back it up. But alas, the enemies were still in control. Their movement was very deliberate and was apparent that they had some sort of game plan at the ready, which meant if I wanted to give my frontline the edge, I'd have to force the enemies to start making uncomfortable decisions. And that decision came in the form of an amplification matrix placed right in their face. The enemy Reinhardt felt he had no choice but to safeguard my ultimate, despite most of us not even being in position where we could make use of it, which definitely played into my cards. But their Reinhardt was not the only one who had to make uncomfortable decisions. When pitted with a choice between one-shotting a dead-eyeing McCree and keeping our Zarya alive, he decided that getting rid of the gunslinger had priority. In this case, the result justifies the means, because not only did it get the remaining defenders to completely back out, allowing Ninja and me to escort the objective, but our Mercy undid that elimination as well. I was all about the way our offense was going. We finally had a response to right about every play the enemies decided to throw at us, and we immediately answered in kind with a play of our own to maintain our position at the top. Everything that could potentially go wrong for the red team was officially going wrong, and let me just say that I'm very glad not to be in their voice chat right now. Speaking of which, our own voice chat had actually gotten really quiet ever since halfway through the second point. It felt like we were mostly running on instinct and only few of our plays were deliberately coordinated anymore. It's hard to say if this is a good or a bad thing, but following our stellar performance during this offense, I figured it wouldn't hurt to discuss our game plan for the final round. We should try to play for window, right? Just like, be careful, let me get my ultimate up, and then we rush hard. If we feed too hard, they're just gonna roll us with ultimates again. Because that's the only way they win is with ultimates, this entire game.
Wait, Cliff, is that you?
Excuse me, it might be.
Holy man, I enjoy your content.
Hey, thanks man.
I've seen you in my higher games too, so kind of fun to meet you in game right now.
Alright, let's win this. For YouTube. Accompanied by the lovely sound of Rashid's keyboard ASMR, I promised him that I would turn this game into an episode if we are to win. And well, what can I say? Winning we did. The red team's morale went to rock bottom once we not only figured out their playstyle, but also found a way to play against it. Their lack of adaptability would ultimately be their downfall as we comfortably walked half of our team onto the objective while the rest of us was dismantling their lineup from behind. I really could have done without the enemy team flaming one another in general chat towards the end, but this match really was one of the more fun ones I had coming back, and now you also know why I made this an episode and why it is titled the way it is. Hey, let's go guys.
I told you.
Good job.
Easy. Bro, you get a main tank on DPS and that's how you win games easy.
I've been very fortunate to where most of my run-ins with viewers of mine have actually been really pleasant, not only because they were being nice, but also because they're really good players. And it is worth mentioning that, personally, I cringe at the idea of calling my audience fans, and the only reason I still refer to them as such is because as a search tag, it does better in the algorithm. I don't know, it just feels presumptuous to suggest that only because somebody occasionally watches my content, they'd immediately be considering themselves a fan, especially for a small nobody like myself. Either way, whether you call yourself a fan or just a casual viewer, I appreciate you guys all the same for watching my videos and just being generally awesome in the comments and in-game whenever I meet you. I don't have the most outgoing personality and I rarely read the text chat in-game, so if I ever miss a comment of yours in Overwatch, I'm really sorry about that. So I don't know what exactly it is, but I've been having a great time in Overwatch recently. Maybe it's because of that month and a half during which technical issues stopped me from playing. Maybe it's my rank being high enough where people press W, but not so high that they land every shot. Or maybe Jeff and the Overwatch team are actually doing something right, resulting in me having a great old time. Whatever the case may be, Overwatch, for me personally anyway, is in a great spot right now. I've never been happier about having no idea what the meta is, and during my time playing, I've encountered so many different compositions that I've honestly lost track. And you can tell I've been having a great time because I've been playing one hero very often, and that is Ana. Now you might know that Zenyatta is my main, simply due to the fact that he is my best pick, but I definitely find Ana more fun to play, even if I'm not as good at her. And because I am not very good at her, I have more trouble making her work outside a meta that distinctively favors her. However, since I have no idea what the meta is, I've just been running it down mid on Ana in hopes of eventually reawakening my long-lost potential. But to make sure I can protect myself from vicious flankers, I've called upon an old friend of mine. Birdie has returned to Overwatch and is going to make sure that I can complete my training before being sent back to the depths of the spawn room. Arriving in Rialto, Birdie and I knew exactly which heroes he wanted to play. It's always a great coincidence to end up on a map where you can default to your comfort picks, but little did we know at the time that we weren't the only ones about to one-trick our favorite heroes for the duration of this game. But if there's one thing that comes packaged with being a one-trick, it's a whole lot of confidence born in vast amounts of experience. And the enemy team was about to learn just how confident we are. Between a Reinhardt that knows no fear and a Lucio that unbound the S-key, there was nothing stopping us from rushing into the enemy diva, who falsely assumed would be able to fly into us without immediately getting annihilated. Our Mei attempted to block her off with a wall, which unfortunately backfired, but we weren't worried about that. If anything, you can call that an extended stagger play, because while our Reinhardt was holding his own against the remaining enemy tank, my Mei boldly ran past that barrier to deliver the final blow just before sniping the mini diva that previously got away. Granted, our collective smashing of the W key briefly made us forget about the existence of the payload, so here's hoping that the few meters we lost don't come back to bite us. But there was one player who magically escaped our onslaught, now waiting for the right opportunity to strike and allow his team to gain control. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as the blue team arrived on site, Tracer began making her presence known by peppering me in the back. In cases like these, the payload is absolutely my best friend. It offers cover as well as minor amounts of healing, but the pressure was still on, which made it difficult for me to use my cooldowns to their fullest potential to keep my teammates alive. At least my nano boost came online just in time to keep my Reinhardt from taking lethal damage, which at this point in the teamfight would definitely spell doom for our chances to win. The enemy diva had since made a swap to Roadhog and continued to be an annoyance off on the flank, but eventually found himself chased down by Clutch and Birdie. Our frontline had since stabilized itself in part thanks to our McCree scaring the enemy Tracer off of me while continuing to collect eliminations. The defenders went for one last desperate nano blade, but at that point, even that was not enough to stop us. We were off to a fantastic start on our offense. One of the biggest fears I have on Rialto is getting stuck on the first point, so having blasted through it the way we did was a big weight off my shoulders. Though the enemies already began making hero swaps to attempt to counter our group of one-tricks, the two Reinhardt's patience was truly being tested when we clashed again at the next choke point. Finding the perfect balance between holding up your barrier and hard inting can be really tough, but for the time being, both of them were trying to feel out the other's playstyle. Surprisingly enough, the blue team was not trying to push their advantage when they found an opening pick on our McCree, and as much as we were ready for a retaliation, they gave us all the time in the world to stabilize. Their indecisiveness inevitably gave us the opportunity to shove them into a corner where they became a prime target for a graviton surge combined with the collective power of all of our left clicks. By the time our McCree returned from spawn, he saw the remaining defenders scatter about in a desperate attempt to at least pick up a kill before falling themselves, but it was obvious that Trap was not about to go in another walk of shame from the respawn room, and as such, he played the janitor as he cleaned up the staggering squishies. But they weren't the only ones reeking of desperation. Their mystery heroes playing off-tank Disco was trying to solo ult our Reinhardt in an act of defiance, but Birdie decided that a solo ultimate should be answered with another solo ultimate, allowing our team to remain intact. If you're anything like me, then games going as well as this one raise a lot of suspicion. This is not how I know Overwatch to work, and it makes me paranoid. Did the matchmaker fall asleep? Are the enemies not warmed up yet? How is my team going to react when we inevitably lose a team fight? I just had a feeling in my gut that our streak was about to end. And that feeling was definitely justified when my tanks decided to push up without the rest of our team after explicitly having been told that one of them was down and the other one was escorting the payload. The enemy Hanzo came back swinging not only with the ridiculously fast execution of our Zarya, but with a follow-up dragon strike that really put the nail in the coffin. At this point, the thing that I was trying to save wasn't so much my individual teammates, two of which did a great job of securing our retreat, but our morale. I've seen it happen time and time again, especially down in Diamond. When you are rolling the opposition for most of the game, the moment something goes wrong, people start throwing a hissy fit. I may sound sound very pessimistic now, but trust me, that is an observation made throughout thousands of hours that I spent in this game. Though much to my surprise, our voice comms remained tight and nobody uttered as much as a word of complaint, allowing us to set up another attack incredibly swiftly. By then I felt more like a passenger than a member of this team. I mean, sure, I was providing boatloads of healing as well as an Anubis, but there were so many moving parts to how we engaged this fight that really left me impressed with how well my teammates are doing individually as well as together. But as it turns out, leaving me impressed is not necessarily good enough to take home the V-Bucks, because the enemies knew full well to take advantage of that 2 CP on wheels type of spawn advantage, which gave us a really hard time cracking the last point. Though if you want to impress me, you can easily do that by simply knocking on that like button. Trust me, it helps out more than you know. Honestly, there's no shame in failing to capture the last point on a payload map. That game mode is all about momentum, and once you lose it, it is really tough to come back. The key here is to know when you can and cannot get away with your life, either resetting quickly or disengaging preemptively to be able to get as many attempts as possible, though one of our teammates had a bit of a different idea. While the defenders were chasing us back to our spawn to try and stagger us, there was one player who remained in the shadows. Clutch One, the May player, was really trying to live up to his name as he was sneaking about in the underground. Nobody expects a one-trick Inquisition until it is too late, and much in that same vein, the defenders did not manage to arrive in time to stop him from capping. As you can imagine, there was a lot of cheering happening in our voice chat as that play secured our offense, but since there's always two sides to a coin, we had to make sure to not mess up our defense. To say that we didn't expect things to turn out the way they did would be an understatement. The blue team had us truly stumped by the time we got to the final checkpoint, but a backcap by one of the least mobile characters in the game would ultimately push us over the finish line. By that point in the match, all of us felt validated in our one-trick ways, while the enemy team was more than willing to swap off seemingly any hero in their composition. I can't help but wonder how many of these changes were motivated by a collective effort versus individual decisions, but after losing their defense the way they did, there was probably some bad blood in voice chat. Either way, we were still far from calling ourselves the victor, so it's time to get this payload on the road one more time. Birdie tried to kick this round off right by turning up the heat with an environmental elimination, but sadly he was the only one set on fire by the time he arrived in the comforting arms of our backline. The enemy team definitely had damage to spare, and while it wasn't our intention to try and hold super aggressively, things just kinda ended up the way they did, and that way included our Hanzo being the first casualty. I was definitely starting to get pushed to my limits. First I failed to remain calm while getting harassed by a tracer on our offense, and now I was having a really hard time keeping my teammates alive on our defense as the enemy team continued to turn up the intensity. Our collective HP values eventually normalized into a safe range as the smart use of our cooldowns allowed us to slowly push the attackers back. But Disco was keen to put his ability to flex on display, and that on Winston of all heroes. Everyone knows that the monkey scientist isn't exactly the strongest tank in the roster, but it was our carelessness that allowed him to start picking us apart. Disco was absolutely making use of the fact that we didn't have a lot of reliable damage between the Hanzo and the Mei, and I was dumbfounded to see how long he survived in the front line. But as soon as he tried his luck in the back, his sleep dart would be his undoing. While you would assume that narrowly escaping Doom should cause us to play more cautiously, Birdie decided to full send it into the enemy backline while realizing too late that his extended break away from the game really did a number on his wall riding ability. Ultimately, he suffered the same fate as Disco did. But before you think I'm just pointing fingers at others, I too was committing one of the cardinal sins of Overwatch, which was standing still at literally any point in the game. Birdie and I had left the rest of our team in a really tough position. Without my healing to support the hold and without his speed boost to allow them to disengage, they couldn't help but get pushed back slowly and painfully. This created a desperate situation for my Reinhardt, who was now the sole protector of the rest of our team. Birdie and I were on the way back, so if he can buy us just a few more seconds, that could already make the difference. But just when he found an opening for a massive game-changing shatter, Clutch's wall began rising towards the heaven to block his legendary play. Since the two of us were still in spawn, we didn't know why everybody was freaking out in voice chat, and I just kind of assumed that our Reinhardt landed a huge shatter. But man, seeing this in slow motion in the replay makes it extra painful. The support duo had only just come around the corner after those events transpired, barely in time to keep our Reinhardt alive, but too late to save our Mei. My Season 2 instincts were coming back to me, and I was looking for somebody out of position whom I could snipe to turn the tide in our favor, but before I could follow up any sort of worthwhile play, I found myself getting juggled by Disco. When it rains, it pours, because the Monkey Mans was really showing off his diving skills, which most assuredly put me into full panic mode, allowing for a well-deserved elimination. Though Birdie was not about to let him get away with murder, immediately immediately setting his sight on him to reclaim my honor as soon as he returned from spawn. And well, let's just say that justice was indeed served. Of course, the goal of that mission was ultimately just to save my ego, and it didn't end up doing much of anything for us when it came to stopping the payload. Birdie paid with his life once again while the rest of us were trying to regroup. But only because we're down doesn't mean we're out, and if you think that our confidence was broken, then think again.
Nice, Shadow. Nice. Big. Huge. Oh, we just go. We just speed into them now.
They're on us off.
I'm low.
I got growth.
Reloading.
Charge shield.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, maybe? No shield.
If you're trying to stop a snowball in lower ranks, there are two basic principles you have to follow. For one, you have to force the enemy team to use resources like ultimates that they'd rather keep for a later time. And on top of that, you have to make sure that your entire team fights and falls together. I was glad to see that no amount of lost fights were enough to take away from my team's ferocity, and they were more inclined than ever to continue fighting at 110%. And now that we successfully bled some ultimates out of the attacker's bank, we had a chance to come back. As we rained onto the opposition, both teams began to aggressively empty the remainder of their available ultimates in a rainbow of special effects. A chaotic fight like this one definitely played into our cards as we were enjoying a hefty respawn advantage. And as such, every elimination we picked up was infinitely more valuable than our losses. Of course, we wouldn't be able to win this fight without making some sort of sacrifice, and in this case, Disco was determined to show me the door once again as I found myself helplessly juggled back to my spawn. This was one of those really funny situations where I'm pretty sure most of my team thought that Disco wanted to reset for the next team fight, but in actuality, he just went for the small health pack. Every single member of our team was aware of the monkey off to the side, and yet nobody did a dang thing about it, allowing him to collect yet another elimination before vanishing like the Dark Knight himself. Prior to that elimination, Birdie also full-sended into the enemy Ana, and while he succeeded in claiming victory over the old lady, he also wouldn't be allowed to retreat. With how much manpower we were bleeding, the enemy Hanzo figured he might try his luck at a very aggressive version of a backcap. However, by grace of our respawn advantage, as well as his incapability of role-playing the stealthy assassin he chose to play, we would conclude this team fight without losing the second point. Now, what I've just said may seem like an obvious point, but it is worth mentioning that my monkey brain somehow completely glanced over the fact that we did secure the second point. As much as I would love to claim some sort of big brain strategy of playing way in the back to force the enemies to use cooldowns on me, as I have done in the past, really, I was just under the impression that my teammates were pushing into the third spawn. Disco had definitely done his job when said job was making me go insane over his repeated primal dives, but he must have not realized that diving in McCree wouldn't be quite so easy. Though thankfully for him, a resurrection allowed for an expedient return to the frontline featuring another primal rage. The rest of my team had since realized that Disco was giving me a really hard time, and between Birdie booping him away from me and Trap playing my personal bodyguard, I could continue to do my job without immediately having to fear for my life. Contrary to me playing Ana, Solar Hound must have been borderline invisible, because rather than getting dove off cooldown, they were sneaking around some boxes Metal Gear style to not only land a sleep dart, but to confirm an elimination before anyone turned around to beat them into submission. Meanwhile, in our backline, I was about to get dove yet again, but this time it wasn't Disco who tried to put the fear of the Kaplan in my heart. The enemy Hanzo went for another wall climb play, and I was the only one who could stop him from backcapping. Okay, that was not entirely true. I was very vocal in voice chat about our visitor over here, and Birdie was hard inting off cooldown, so to call his arrival from spawn a coincidence would be far-fetched. By the way, if you think that Birdie was actually throwing in this game, make sure you are subscribed, because next week the two of us are going to end up in a match with an actual thrower, nasty attitude and everything, so don't forget to ring that bell. But for the time being, I finally realized that we were in fact fighting for the second and not the third point of the map. Sitting in the back all game can get boring, so much like my Zenyatta play, I decided to push up, though I had a bit of a different idea for how aggressively we wanted to take this defense, resulting in me kicking the bucket. Let us also appreciate the fact that the year is 2021 and Hanzo just gets to blindly spam down a choke point for free kills, making me wonder how that is any better than Scatter Arrow. That pick meant go time for the rest of the blue team, who figured that a lack of healing might be their opportunity to cover the last bit of distance they needed, but my teammates were not shy to make up for my positional misplay by shoving ultimates and cooldowns down the pipe in an attempt of keeping us combat ready. A bird's eye view makes it a tad bit easier to tell what actually went down when so many players decided to smash down on the Q button. Just know that we successfully survived another engagement, leaving the enemies enemies with only enough time for a single team fight. Disco may have accumulated his fair share of misplays leading up to this fight, but he was the difference maker once, and by Jeff, he seemed determined to do it again. All he needed was the right timing. Unfortunately for him, he just wasn't meant to get that sort of Cinderella story, because Clutch One had prepared a play of his own, and when push came to shove, him denying entry to the payload would seal their destiny. I gotta say, I know I just teased what the next episode is going to be about, and it's not like Overwatch doesn't have its fair share of frustrating experiences to offer, but something about it right now just feels so very right. Most people that have played online multiplayer games can probably list a whole host of possible issues that arise in pretty much every such game that they played. From poor balancing to negligent behavior towards smurfing, there are things that developers and players just don't always see eye to eye about. But one thing that everybody agrees has to stop is throwing. You can argue your way into a lot of nuance when it comes to discussing the balance of a PvP game, but when somebody's intentionally trying to lose, that is just never okay. But it becomes a bit of an issue in cases like Overwatch, where the game is trying really hard to make you feel good about yourself without ever telling you when you are doing something wrong. Nobody wants to admit to being the issue when one of their competitive matches is going south, and as such, everybody's pointing fingers at each other while accusing them of throwing. That's a lot of nuance to take in. Nuance that I don't have any interest in covering today, because when you have a guy on your team that literally turns around to shoot his ultimate off the map while telling you not to capture the objective, then the case is pretty cut and dry. But before we get into how Birdie and I decided to deal with that, let us talk about our sponsor for today, the like button. Okay, fine, this episode isn't sponsored, which means our story today takes place on Anubis. Now, I don't believe it's a hot take to say that I don't enjoy playing on 2CP maps. In fact, if you want to know how much I dislike it, look no further than me literally leaving one of my playset matches because I was having a great day up until that point, and I refuse for this game mode to change that. You can imagine my reaction when Jeff tossed me on Anubis again during the same placement session after the great sacrifice I made previously. Point being, I don't want to actually get suspended indefinitely, so I couldn't simply leave this match as well. For Birdie, who had taken an extended break away from the game, navigating the staircases of Anubis also ended up being a bit of a challenge.
Fresh Dax. Alright, I'm gonna be back here. Or wait, that's not a way back there. I'm gonna be back here.
Okay.
Cliff, I forgot how to get up.
Behind me.
Alright, looks like I'm not gonna be back there, never mind. You know what? No, I'm gonna go for it.
Okay, I guess we're just not gonna have healing for the first fight, that's fine. While I was contemplating why I decided to bring Birdie back in the first place, our main tank was having a bit of a crisis of his own. Oxfee seemed similarly confused about the layout of the map and where he should or shouldn't be when the game starts. Eventually, he found his way on the high ground, however, it definitely was not a secret to the enemy team. It's always a great sign when the enemy Reinhardt literally gets to stand still in excess of 5 seconds without his barrier going down, but that wasn't even the worst part. Oxfee had the brilliant idea of hard focusing the enemy Widowmaker, which in itself doesn't sound like a bad plan, but the execution of it left him eating dirt, much to the detriment of the rest of us. Between our Doomfist just kinda AFKing on high ground and our Winston trying to set a world record for turbo inting in a Masters game, there was absolutely nothing stopping the red team from just waltzing towards us. Now, I'm not gonna pretend like there was much more than that to our first point hold. Both Oxfee and Dax traded their lives for 1 elimination each, and if you know anything about 2CP, you also know that that's not gonna pay the bills. The rest of us were left completely defenseless against a team that lost nothing of value whatsoever while enjoying their first point respawn advantage. It took no more than a single push for them to capture the objective, which already gave me a reason to worry. I would love to attribute that first fight to a lapse in judgment that could easily be fixed, but our monkey immediately repeated what happened just a minute ago, in which he boldly chased down the enemy Widowmaker at the cost of his life. And if you think that Dax might make for a saving grace here, he also did the exact same thing as before in sheer disregard for the failure he experienced as a result. Embarrassingly enough, he didn't even manage to pick up an elimination before biting the dust this time. We had an Ice Cube's chance in hell of winning this game on the basis of either our skill or coordination, which meant the only thing we could rely on was the turning of tables in which we were the ones with a spawn advantage. Most of our heroes of choice were fast enough to continue staggering onto the point, which means all we needed to stabilize was slowly picking the enemy team off. A flanking Nano Zarya ended up achieving exactly that for us, but unfortunately it came at the cost of 56% capture progression. The red team had since swapped to a Tracer in hopes of keeping this teamfight alive and actually succeeded in taking out several low HP targets. When looking at the replay, I was already rolling my eyes over a smurfing Tracer that disrespected us so much as to where she wasn't even moving while firing, but taking a closer look I realized this person is not standing still as a matter of confidence or disrespect, but because they legitimately have trouble landing shots while moving. And they got away with it too, because nobody was even looking at them. To think that we were struggling so much against a team that, by all accounts, is probably as bad as us was very upsetting. Thankfully, our spawn advantage would eventually prevail so that everyone on my team who has been making the same mistakes for the last 2 fights can continue to do so. Dax was really putting on display why I hate the fact that Doomfist exists in the first place. Whenever the enemy team plays him, it's some top 500 smurf account starting a rollout on King's Road just to one-shot me on Hollywood. But when they're on my team, it's like they're playing with a Mario Kart steering wheel 50 feet away from the monitor. The enemy Reinhardt was not only reading but outplaying our Doomfist by almost every conceivable metric, but thankfully we had made a swap to Reinhardt ourselves, which in one fell swoop gave us a fighting chance. Anarchy was finally getting the protection and support he needed to show off just what he was made of, and not only did we survive the immediate next ultimate-filled teamfight after swapping off Winston, but the following one as well. Of course, not without our Doomfist dying, but at that point, that was neither here nor there. I mean, to be honest, if I was forced to pick between either Dax or Oxfree throwing my game, I'd definitely rather have my main tank pull this weight, because you can always try and make up for a lack of damage, which happens a lot. But having bad tanks really feels like a way bigger problem to have. But Dax contributing absolutely nothing of value would continue to be a recurring theme throughout this game, even before he decided to willingly give up. What really ended up putting the nail in the coffin, however, was me not hearing the enemy McCree sneaking up behind me in the heat of battle. With no Transcendence to keep us alive and most of our ultimates depleted to no avail, the enemy team had little trouble aggressively shoving us off the objective. I was desperately trying to collect the last bit of ultimate charge to stall out the objective, but the enemy Zarya came in clutch with a big brain graviton switch that stopped us from even touching the point. We succeeded in stripping minutes off the timer, but the red team still had many more at their disposal, and you can be certain that after a round like that, sour attitudes are bound to occur. Going into the second round on Anubis, I had a very hard time telling if we were losing due to the enemy team's proficiency and team play or simply due to our own incompetence. I wouldn't blame you for thinking that Dax was already throwing the game during our defense, considering the fact that he found a way to die during every single engagement, multiple times even. But believe it or not, this was before he decided to actually put in the effort to legitimately throw. Seeing Oxfree back on Winston was also not giving me a lot of confidence, considering his prior performance on that hero and our noticeable improvement in survivability once he swapped to Reinhardt, but alas, the second round began with a dive comp. By now you guys might have also realized that Xem's heavily favors a playstyle that allowed him to stand still, explaining his swap to Widowmaker, and Dax wouldn't be Dax if he didn't find a way to be the first one out of the fight yet again. Naturally, that was not our only problem. While I was trying to make use of our speed boost to get into position, our tanks were inexplicably very fond of the S button, which is never a good sign for that role. Our initial approach to this fight was not only very slow, but also very uncoordinated and actually downright awkward. If I didn't know any better, I'd assume that this was our first time playing Overwatch, definitely far away from the Masters lobby that this was supposed to be. Though as much as I saw nothing but certain defeat, Oxfree was not bothered by any of that, and used the fact that the enemy team wasn't taking us seriously to create an opening. Or to be more exact, elaborate on an opening created by our Tracer who was taking up the red team's attention, while all of us were busy being useless in the choke point. I actually found it really hard to comprehend how we went from 0 to 100 in a matter of seconds. It was the light at the end of the tunnel that I needed to shed my pessimistic attitude, because let me tell you, if somebody was not part of that first point cap, it was me, and I was determined to make up for that. Let us not forget that this is 2CP. It doesn't matter how much we got stomped the first time around. Now that we succeeded in capturing the first objective, we were actually in contention for an even better time bank. Leading the charge and out with my nano boost, Oxfree boldly dove into the enemy backline, attracting the attention of almost every member on their team while flailing about. He was doing a fantastic job of securing us the space we needed to move onto the point while baiting out a multitude of major cooldowns. Is what I would say if his lack of presence in the tank brawl didn't mean that the enemy Reinhardt just got to shatter our backline absolutely for free. But since the universe doesn't revolve around me nor Dax, Anarchy and Zeke decided to pull out all the stops in order to secure this fight after all. It is worth pointing out that for a 3600 lobby, Anarchy was having a really solid showing on Tracer, definitely outshining his mirror pick by a long shot and keeping our hopes of an even better time bank alive. Things really went downhill for us though when Zeke was caught out of position by a charge. As much as that Reinhardt could be eliminated, we no longer had enough players on the point to extend the enemy team's respawn timer, and as such, we found ourselves rudely ejected off the point. Xems was making an effort of putting us on the stagger train, but since doing so forced him to actually move his character, I didn't have too much to worry about. Zeke successfully secured my retreat, allowing us to regroup. Remember when I said that we were in contention for an even better time bank than the red team? Yeah, not only was that no longer the case, but every teamfight that followed our initial attempt was just horrendous. For some reason, Oxfree was under the impression that as a Winston player, it was his responsibility ability to chase down the enemy Tracer. That resulted in us not only severely lacking in the main tank department as far as the teamfight was concerned, but it also ensured that the enemy Tracer could use Pulse Bomb as if it is a cooldown more than an ultimate. He eventually swapped back to Reinhardt, which definitely helped simply due to the fact that he could no longer leap across the map in an effort of turbo-inting his brains out, but since it took him 3 more teamfights to make that swap, the enemy team still had plenty of ultimates to spare from his previous escapades. It also wasn't helping that no matter how many ultimates we tried to toss at the problem, the enemy team was simply reading us like a book. By that point in the game, Dax had successfully died during every single engagement, got outplayed by Xem's countless times so as the mechanics of a gold player, ensured that the enemy Zarya never dropped below 100% charge due to his inability to stop shooting bubbles, and to top it all off, he didn't say a word in voice chat to coordinate his ultimate with our Zarya. Listen, this episode is not meant to beat the bush about how poorly Dax was playing, but it really paints a picture of the kind of person that consciously makes a decision to throw a game. Because even before he decided to willingly do so, it wasn't like he was much of a help at all. By the time our last teamfight rolled around, I had fallen into a state of acceptance, accepting that we're just not meant to win this game. However, if we're gonna go down anyway, we might as well go down with a bang.
Nice immortality.
I'm dead, GG.
Just said GG. Okay.
We need to regroup. Okay, that's 1 for 1, good.
Zarya 1, Zarya 1. Nice. Speeding.
What the heck?
Oh my god, we finished with time. Holy crap, dude. It's still winnable, Cliff.
Despite our Hanzo literally throwing.
Yeah, dude, why worked so hard to like not let him throw and he still threw?
Unbelievably, miraculously, somehow we succeeded in taking the second point without triggering overtime. You probably heard it during the last clip, but Dax, the same player that probably had a double-digit feed count by now, was trying to tell us not to capture the objective after we had finally broken through the red team's defenses. Now, I will come out and admit that I was fully prepared to take the L in this match multiple times. Just the fact that we had to play Anubis was reason enough to be annoyed, but the repeated feeding of my teammates as well as the necessity for me to sub to a hero I didn't enjoy playing turned me into a pessimist. However, I'm also the type of childish person that will continue to talk over somebody else for the sole purpose of not allowing a douchebag to have the final word in an argument. After fighting tooth and nail to stay in this match, I refuse to let this guy feel validated in his nonsense. I honestly could not care less about the result of this game in general, but if it means showing him that we can win even while he's actively trying to throw, then so be it. Of course, idiots like that don't care about what anyone else thinks, but Jeff knows it's gonna help me feel better about myself to prove him wrong anyway. And Xem's not taking us seriously was the exact kind of advantage we needed. Overconfidence was their downfall the first time, and with them as an early pick, we had the chance to make use of it once again. Enjoying the support of Birdie's speed boost as well as my immortality field, we could engage the main tank brawl without immediately getting blown up. Our Hanzo may still be sitting in the spawn room, but thanks to Xem's feeding, so did theirs. While our team had displayed a certain level of aggression all throughout this game, we only rarely backed it up with enough competence to make it worthwhile. But something about Dax having openly given up made us put 120% more effort just so we can stand tall at the end of this game while ridiculing his attitude. Though with that said, as much as our will remained unbroken, our spines did not. No amount of motivation could overpower the fact that the red team was simply better than we were. But the fact that we captured the first point is all we needed to still be able to come out victorious, leading us to a final round. Even with our lack of cohesion, clearly we were able to make this somewhat of a close game. It is sad to think about because as much as you can chalk this up as a matchmaking failure, if Dax just put in the effort to play properly, we would actually be doing really well. But obviously that train had long left the station, meaning the 5 of us had to find a way to turn the tide. Starting this round off with an ultimate generating fire strike into the enemy spawn, you can tell that Oxy was ready to continue giving it his all, firmly holding onto a slim chance for victory even when he struggled with getting back in position. Obviously it would take more than that to stop the red team's advance, though delivering on what was necessary wasn't easy when one of your DPS is still sitting in spawn crying. The attackers remained uncontested as they set up their play, and just like before, we began this round on the back foot. Their Widowmaker made sure that we couldn't utilize half the angles we wanted to play around, while our obvious lack of damage made sure they could W into us without a care in the world. The enemy team had demonstrated that victory was no longer a possible outcome for us as they systematically decimated our entire lineup. Naturally, we wouldn't count on Dax helping us, and if you think that him spending the first fight in spawn was bad, then you'll be surprised to find out that him being part of the engagement is not only not useful, but a downright detriment, as him perishing only contributed to the enemy team's ultimate bank. Baptiste isn't exactly what I would consider a strong pick of mine, but being able to sit on high ground while AoE spamming my teammates and healing was proving to be very valuable regardless. Eventually my Reinhardt found an opening to take out the enemy Ana, and as much as I assumed that would cause the enemies to retreat, instead they doubled down with a Graviton Surge to try and end things once and for all. But despite the course this game has taken, Anarchy still had the strength to come in clutch with a massive Deadeye that allowed us to continue fighting. We chased down every staggered elimination we could get our hands on in an attempt of bleeding more time off the clock. Our voice chat remained active, and most of us were determined to take this all the way. And well, as much as I wish I could tell you that our determination resulted in a happy end, things just don't always work out that way. Only because you're doing the right thing doesn't mean good things will happen to you, and at the end of the day, the weight of Dax ended up dragging our already heavy team to the bottom. Does anyone else ever wonder what the actual purpose of competitive play in Overwatch is? I mean, sure, we can approach this with a very caveman-like attitude and say if there's a ladder, it is meant to be climbed. But am I the only one who just doesn't get that same satisfaction from ranking up anymore? Every game I win brings me closer and closer to a rank that becomes increasingly more restrictive with the amount of heroes I can play without immediately throwing. And all that for what? A shiny badge I get to flex with? Real gamers don't care about the rank. What they really care about is the challenge. So it's time to take on my biggest challenge yet and see if I can surpass my limits and survive in what is arguably the worst rank in Overwatch while playing my absolute worst role. Now, if it feels to you as though you don't get to watch me play DPS very often, that's because you don't. I have a tendency of getting bored real fast whenever I play that role, and let's just say that 9-minute queue times at 4 PM on a Saturday while using priority passes isn't exactly what I would call a fun time. But unfortunately, this is the only way I get to legitimately play in Platinum without smurfing. Don't be mistaken, if you think that Birdie and I are about to stomp this lobby, then you must have never seen us play DPS. The enemy team, on the other hand, did feature a few smurf accounts which the two of us would have to contest. So even though we are in a low SR match, that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And since I haven't played in Platinum since Season 2, I decided to kick our defense off in the exact same way I did all these years ago. DLC hero or not, the good old 2016 trap worked like a charm, and while I would have loved to start the game off with an elimination, at least our Hammond didn't let his supports get any ultimate charge off the damage I dealt. You can tell by the way I'm positioning myself that I'm definitely taking this match very seriously. Playing around cover is a good habit to have on any role you play, but especially on Zenyatta, and only because the enemy Widowmaker missed her first shot does not mean she's not dangerous. And Jammer the Widow Smurf immediately decided to prove that by taking out those who dare to not respect her presence. We had to temporarily forsake the high ground when her jump shots became increasingly aggressive thanks to the support of her Hammond's diving maneuver. It was obvious that Jammer did not approach this game with the amount of caution that I put on display, which allowed me to calculate the perfect angle by which my explosives can eliminate her. And with the enemy sniper taken care of, it was time to reclaim the high ground and counter-dive the Hammond who was trying to stop my diva from getting into her mech. Playing DPS like the supports and playing Zenyatta like a flanker seem to be habits I simply cannot shed. For the time being, I felt validated in my supportive play securing the safety of my teammates, but there will be a time where playing defensively is not going to be enough. Somebody who could stand to play a bit more defensively was our Hammond though. Of course we appreciated him stalling out the card, but he could have at least perished in a more convenient location so that our Mercy does not have to put herself in mortal danger to bring him back. Fool me once and all the rest of it, because the way that our Hammond decided to thank our Mercy was by immediately heart-inting into the enemy Widowmaker just to get eliminated once more. I guess some things never change no matter the rank, huh? The enemies began gaining ground on us after getting rid of our Hammond, and I tried to turn the tide with my Riptire. However, it was foolish of me to expect that I could land that ultimate on a DPS smurf. Things began to properly fall apart for us when the red team decided to respond to my ultimate with a bunch of ultimates of their own, and unfortunately not everybody had a convenient sprint ability that allowed us to retreat. Carbine had since returned from his initial double feed, but rather than trying to contest the card, he figured that continuing to focus the smurf duel was the better course of action. It isn't often that I see Hammond players run away from Widowmakers, but I really had to wonder what the heck he was doing to continue getting eliminated by her when his character was designed to make her life difficult. Either way, our defense had completely fallen apart at that point. The red team had us beaten not only through superior use of ultimates, but also just flat out better basic plays. And they had every intention of keeping up the pace because many of us were trying to recontest the card, which in hindsight ended up being a futile attempt. I can definitely see why Carbine was so intent on focusing Jammer. She was not only tearing through our lineup, but also continued to deny every single one of my ultimates. Blindly spamming down choke points is fun and all, but at some point you do start to grab the occasional elimination. Thankfully, the enemy Genji came to provide exactly that, getting juggled and wombo comboed by Birdie and me. The opposing Winston player Mayebs did not find that funny at all though, and after we had wasted our cooldowns to eliminate his Genji, figured he could teach us a lesson by zapping us back to our spawn. Carbine finally gave up his futile attempt at spawn camping Jammer, returning to his card stalling duties, which have proven to at least give us a fighting chance. And one thing that became very apparent to me was that Hammond isn't just completely overpowered in the hands of Grandmaster players who really know how to make use of his overtuned kit, but Platz in particular seemed to have a really hard time getting him off the card. It was that kind of distraction our diva needed to come flying in with an ultimate to officially lead our comeback. Teammates of ours came pouring out of every nook and cranny on the map to make use of that opening pick provided by Terry. The red team had bitten off more than they could chew, and at last we stopped the card from moving. Since Birdie was too busy one-tricking the worst DPS hero in the game, and I obviously wasn't doing anything useful on Junkertown anymore, I took it upon myself to swap to a character that can save our supports from the enemy dive. Hitscan is not exactly my forte. I always said that if I wanted to play a point-and-click adventure, I'd go and download CSGO Overwatch, but McCree was the best pick in my eyes at the time, and as such, here we are whiffing shots in an attempt of scaring the enemy flankers off my teammates. It is worth pointing out though that our resident flanker Carbine was not content with simply holding onto the payload. It really felt like he was trying to establish the smurf differential in this game, boldly charging into the enemy spawn to strip more time off the clock by imprisoning the attackers. But no king rules forever, my son, and it should come to absolutely nobody's surprise that his aggressive style of tanking was eventually going to cost him his head. Much like a single elimination was all we needed for our comeback, the enemy team used the sudden demise of Carbine to pick us apart before I could even get back in position. The rest of my team also had a really hard time getting the attackers off our high ground, and rather than securing our position, we were left no choice but to forsake it. Birdie in particular was having a really hard time because while he was enjoying the support of our Mercy, it still was not enough to stop him from dying almost immediately after having been resurrected. Being a low mobility Andy, you can be certain that I was absolutely sick and tired of all these kids blinking, leaping, zipping, and running around me. If I don't get to do any of these things, then neither do they, and the best way to achieve that was by sending them back to spawn. I have to admit that at times it becomes a bit challenging to see who is currently having the upper hand. There's a lot of back and forth going on between our teams, which is definitely a good sign as far as a match of Overwatch is concerned, but gives me a really hard time choosing the right background music. Don't bother getting used to the tunes of heroism because the red team was not losing any time and came back with a vengeance. Vengeance in form of a nano blade to which we simply had no good response. The second point was lost as well, but I had good faith in our ability to hold the red team off for good this time. Don't forget that we are only struggling whenever Carbine decides to go on a flanking adventure, and the last point on Dorado does not actually allow for a lot of that to happen. All we had to do was stabilize our position one last time to be able to make use of our spawn advantage. However, the red team was giving us a lot of trouble when it came to our attempts of regrouping. The clock was ticking down, and you know things are bad when your Mercy has to stop pulling at the Glock. The attackers definitely knew how to ride a wave, meaning we had to find a way to kick them off the board. Birdie made the switch from Prey to Hunter, turning around as soon as our Mercy arrived to attempt to chase down the opposing Mercy. I do have to cut him some slack here because he was playing at 220 ping at the time of recording, but handicap aside, he eventually secured the kill. The enemy Genji was not a big fan of that, and despite the fact that his team was bleeding out, decided to pull out the weep stick in an attempt at saving the fight. Of course, every Genji player would prefer not to have to use half of their ultimate on a tank, but alas, Carbine was eliminated. Simultaneously, I was finally allowed to leave my spawn room after having been camped for what felt like 10,000 years, just to begin my return by scaring the enemy tracer into recoiling through a minefield. Scare tactics were really the best thing I could provide at the time, as I whiffed every but one bullet on the enemy Ana. I had most assuredly lost my edge by that point in the game, struggling to find my groove on a hit scan hero as I finished my janitor duties with the elimination of the enemy Genji, who was still under the impression that he could solo carry the card to the finish line. It took us way more effort than it realistically had any right to, but we finally arrived in last fight territory, and we were in surprisingly good shape. After having forced the opposition to waste some ultimates on a futile push, we had many more to spare to make sure that we would be the ones to come out victorious. If the red team was mechanically superior, then our best chance to win was by controlling the battlefield. Attackers are bound to get anxious when overtime approaches, so we could get big value out of zoning them with our ultimates. Baptiste's Matrix is one of the most reliable zoning tools in the game, and while it did make the enemy team second guess their positioning, my Deadeye was meant to take advantage of the confusion by eliminating whoever tries to push forward anyway. We had opened this fight up with a whopping 3 eliminations. Whoever survived was surely in panic mode now, and the best thing they could achieve was stalling out the inevitable inevitable. You would never assume that I ranked higher than Platinum on any of my roles of my performance in this match, but our defense had shown me something very important. The whole reason I decided to queue for DPS is because it puts me in a rank that is low enough for me to be able to forget that something like a meta exists. And while McCree was undeniably a good choice in response to the enemies, it wasn't what I was comfortable playing. If we want to beat the red team's distance on the payload, then I'd have to deliver a far stronger DPS performance, meaning it is time for me to return to my roots as a projectile specialist. Now, when I say projectile specialist, really that's just a fancy way of saying one trick. While you wouldn't be wrong to call me up for Zenyatta being my only strong pick, some skill sets transfer more easily than others. Let's just say that when I spent my whole time leading projectiles, it takes some time to get used to instant hit registration. And time was a luxury we didn't have. In games like these where both parties are equally matched, it is important to resort to your comfort picks that allow you to bring your best performance. So as much as I might not be known for my Genji play, my Zenyatta experience should allow me to land more shuriken than I was landing bullets. Fittingly enough, I'd be facing off against Hayden on Hanzo, who was previously also playing Genji. I suppose that sort of positioning might be considered creative in these ranks, but back in Masters I haven't seen anyone stand there in ages because they usually get popped at a spawn. Naturally, a danger that never imposes its implied threat might as well be no danger at all. Hayden may have rained arrows down on us, but none of them actually dealt any damage, so as soon as my shurikens connected with his face, he decided to back out. The real problem was, once again, his DPS counterpart Jammer. The impact that a mercy-pocketed hitscan smurf can have on a low SR game is definitely not to be underestimated. Of course, we could have done a lot of things better in the way we were approaching our offense, from training our trigger finger to stopping the constant flanking. But either way, Jammer would continue to make their presence known in very aggressive fashion. And what Jammer could not eliminate, Hayden made an effort to mop up. At this point, he could really make use of the fact that we were very focused on trying not to get sniped from the other side, though eventually I decided to contest him. I definitely was not bold enough to try and take on Jammer and his belt attachment all on my own, but a Platinum Hanzo was something I felt confident in being able to handle. A perfectly timed deflect allowed me to confirm the elimination, but of course I had to do my due diligence and camp the body for the inevitable res. The opposing Mercy refused to take the L in that situation, popping her wings and going for the resurrection right in front of my face. That slight moment of hesitation before I pulled my blade allowed her to flee into the skybox, but fine, if I can't reach her, I'm just gonna go and slice up literally everybody else. Even with my limited amount of Genji hours, I was feeling much more in my element. I wouldn't forget my supportive playstyle, of course, but in this case, we needed to stack up eliminations to be able to break past the choke points. And that's exactly what we did. We carefully advanced further and further while taking out the remaining defenders with almost surgical precision. There was no way for the red team to stage a cohesive attempt at recontesting unless we make a mistake. Now, Birdie up until that point had been a bit of a non-factor in this game. I know he loves to blame his ping for his lackluster performance, but I've definitely seen a correlation between him playing Soldier and him making incredibly stupid game sense-based decisions. I highlight that just to illustrate how much of the DPS burden was on my shoulders at that point. Though with that said, obviously I wasn't perfect either, and when I found myself stranded between a rock and a hard place, it was only thanks to Birdie's elimination granting me a dash reset that I survived. We're going to ignore the fact that he was the one that made the call to chase Baptiste in the first place, because that doesn't fit my narrative. Anyway, my Zarya and I must have absolutely been on the same page when we began chasing down the remaining defenders. Mercy-pocketed anythings are about the most obnoxious thing in the universe, so I very much approved of them being the recipient of a graviton surge. Our chase was going so well that I made an attempt of renegotiating the recently swapped Hayden back into their spawn, but much like their Mercy refused to leave Jammer alone, their Moira did the same thing here, which eventually led to my demise. Birdie had since returned to finish what I started, and with the rest of our team escorting the objective and him holding onto the high ground, our chances to keep the ball rolling were still there. Well, that was until a new challenger appeared that could benefit from a pocket healer. This was as far from a gentleman's duel as one can imagine, and while all of us can collectively sigh in frustration over the fact that Birdie refused to disengage a fight he obviously could not win, whatever the case may be, we just lost our advantage. Without Birdie controlling the high ground, our tanks would find themselves overwhelmed in no time at all. Jammer's right-click spam was already doing a number on my Reinhardt's barrier, but an incoming charge Deadeye combo was ultimately what sealed the deal. The red team had successfully stopped the payload, and with that began the process of shattering our hopes for victory. Excuse me, what? Who the heck decided to write that garbage into the script? We're in Platinum, for crying out loud. We wouldn't know if we're doing poorly if you shouted it in our faces. So with an unwarranted amount of confidence, we pushed the red team back simply by utilizing our overblown egos. Terry, the gold-ranked Reinhardt legend, was leading the charge even in the face of overwhelming damage piercing his barrier. But who needs barriers anyway when the enemies lay flat on the floor? You might not assume that I'm the type of person to solo blade a Mercy, but every support knows that DPS players aren't half as dangerous as they seem to be without a pocket. I suppose being able to get a few slashes in on their Hammond was a nice bonus, but you and I both know that I was trying to send a message here. The enemies had to feed themselves into the grinder just in a desperate attempt of stalling out the objective. Their last possible win condition was the Hammond's minefield, but at that point, even that wasn't enough to turn the tide. The defenders had awoken the beast, and now they had to deal with our fangs. While I was still trying to live up to average 2900 gameplay, Terry was punching way above his weight class by engaging in an extended stagger strategy that fooled the enemy Hammond into believing they could disengage. Things were going incredibly well for us, so you know that Birdie couldn't help himself and find a way to overextend and be the first one dead once more. Needless to say that all of us were hoping to keep up the pace all the way until the end, but I guess it will be boring if the defenders had just given up. And as much as my mechanics don't show it, my game sense was still that of a Masters player. It was more than obvious by the way that Farah was playing that they were trying to set up for a barrage, but I knew that they wouldn't try to go for it as long as I kept my deflect off cooldown. Between me playing the Watchdog and Birdie poking them from the side, Hayden never found an opening to make use of that ultimate they've been sitting on for so long. Uncertainty breeds discomfort, and that discomfort was urging the defenders to try and end this fight once and for all. As if stung by a bee, everyone in the lobby was currently alive and had an ultimate available, aggressively smashed the Q button. The resulting color vomit made it difficult to see what was happening at the best of times, potentially causing mental damage at worst due to overexposure to flashing lights. But this game had gone on for far too long. We didn't come this far to now let them stall us into oblivion with their spawn advantage, so it is time to turn up the heat one last time. Yes, let's go, Birdie! Double DPS!
That is about how my games have been going.
It is incredible how much fun you can have when you start seeing a purpose on what you are doing. I have long since peaked as a support player, but in the DPS category, there is still a ton to learn from me. I was definitely right in having landed more shuriken than I did bullets, and I really wish that DPS queue times weren't so horrendously long so that I don't lose my motivation to get better. Unfortunately, things are just the way they are right now. I can be happy to find a match period, so as such, the best thing I can do is to enjoy the good games whenever they come around.
Guys, I don't want to go back to gold.
Sometimes matches of Overwatch are really exciting because both the teams facing off against each other are equally matched in skill. Other times, matches of Overwatch are really exciting because the stakes are high. Maybe you're about to rank up or just shy of dropping out of your ranks, so winning becomes more important than usual. And other times again, the monkey that controls the matchmaker at Blizzard HQ fell asleep and you wish that you didn't queue up in the first place. Point being, there's more to a match of Overwatch than just winning or losing. Surely, the journey itself can already be worth the price of admission, and more than just scoring the W, sending a message can be equally important. But nothing is more important than protecting your friend's SR. It's like, I don't care what you say about me, but if you stop fronting my friends, I'll be getting angry. And following that philosophy, you know that I was not about to take a match lightly that could have Birdie drop down into gold. For how much he claimed that he wins a lot of games when he plays without me, he sure did find a way to drop a metric truckload of skill rating between our sessions. And it was my job to make sure that this nightmare doesn't become reality. Dropping down to the rank you started in is a fate worse than uninstalling the game. While I'm very much enjoying my stay in Platinum in light of having been granted the ability to practice Genji without getting rolled, Birdie definitely was not happy about the idea that he could drop back down to gold. But thankfully, our team was very understanding of the predicament he was in, offering some words of encouragement. It would match your border, which would be pretty cool. It was obvious that if Birdie didn't want to lose this game, he would really have to carry his weight. Of course, the enemy team was not about to make this easy for us, but at least we got to compete on a map that we had a lot of confidence playing on. A standard Reinhardt Zarya brawl composition accentuated by my Platinum Genji will be our lineup of choice. We were very much defaulting to the Old Faithful, but only a push will tell if that's enough to beat the defenders. Leading our red team was Green, the Reinhardt player, boldly engaging in the main tank battle to start off the round. I immediately found an opening to take out the enemy Zarya, but rather than playing it safe, doubled down on my dive without the ammo or HP to back up my effort, which didn't end up working out for me. But the damage was already done. Their lineup fell apart in no time at all, allowing us to pick them off one at a time. Any defender left on the capture point was achieving no more than delaying the inevitable, and in the face of an overwhelming advantage, Birdie decided to chase down the enemy Ana. But she wouldn't be the one punished for her lackluster positioning. Ibot, the opposing Reinhardt player, zoomed out of spawn with a drive-by fire strike that was more than enough to do to Birdie what he tried to do to their Ana. As much as I was respecting respecting the energy behind the blue team's repeated attacks, it really was a futile attempt. They didn't have enough mobility to come back at us with a decisive strike, and they were also lacking the burst damage to create an opening which they could make use of, and as such, the payload was ours. Much to my surprise, my team realized the importance of securing space up ahead rather than sitting the entire team on the payload. Leading the charge once more, Green had outplayed his Reinhardt counterpart with a Shadow, but unfortunately failed to follow up on it due to a miscalculated charge. Having been knocked out of Green's range, iBot decided to counter-shatter our main tank to stop him from swinging at his downed teammates, but the rest of our team stepped in to crowd control him once more. In the meantime, I made my way onto the high ground to be the annoying little flanker I was always destined to be. I was lacking the experience to really make a decisive call on when it makes sense to full send it towards the backline, but when I saw my tanks charge in to advance further, I figured I could use a bit of slicing and dicing to help them out. Everything was going really well until we realized we haven't moved the card! Dang it!
Guys, the payload!
Okay, well, maybe I was complimenting us a bit too soon. All that space we just secured was not worth a dime if we don't use it to actually escort the payload. I would lie if I said that this never happened to me in Masters before, but since I am usually playing low mobility heroes that don't have much of a choice but to sit on the card, I have to admit I kinda forgot about that being a thing. Needless to say that we gave the defenders all the time in the world to set up yet another team fight, almost like the previous one hadn't happened at all. And considering the amount of ultimates we used to make that happen, I was not feeling too confident about this engagement. Green had once again found an opening to start off this fight, immediately pinning the enemy Zarya to give us an advantage. However, he left a lot of us without a barrier while still facing off against the remaining defenders. The enemy McCree was comfortably sitting on high ground where he could take shots completely uncontested. We were fighting a war on two fronts, and every player on our team had to make a decision as to which one they wanted to commit to. Being a support main myself, I had to choose between protecting my own healers in the back or diving the opposing ones in the front. Ultimately, I made the split-second decision that cutting off the enemy team's healing was more beneficial than protecting ours, hoping that we can brawl it out in our favor after the fact. Dexter on Ana was trying to keep our own backline intact while I was busy devastating the enemies, and thankfully for him, keeping Birdie alive was just what he needed to save him from an angry Reinhardt, though it is a bit unfortunate that he didn't manage to extend that support to me as well. Granted, I had made the conscious effort to attack rather than protect, so it's not like I can complain about that. Since I was no longer alive to create an opening or to follow up on our Reinhardt's reckless dives, it was now Birdie's responsibility to protect his own SR. The payload was closing in on the second checkpoint, and the blue team was scrambling to find a way to stop us, but proving once more that game sense reigns supreme over mechanics, Birdie kept their entire team away from the card by using Deadeye. This created the opportunity for Green to hammer most of them down at once as they were stacking to hide from that ultimate, resulting in the complete annihilation of any defensive attempt they made, and that without me even doing anything. Well, I guess there was an attempt at countercharging, but I highly doubt that iBot really wants to talk about that. I'm just gonna say how it is. The blue team was playing with their backs against the wall at that point. Whether we did it by choice or by chance, we were cycling our ultimates to constantly nuke the defenders back into their spawn before they really had a chance to set up any plays using their own. And that exact trend would continue when our Zarya dropped their Graviton Surge. Their puny ice wall couldn't stop me from dashing in and out of their lineup, making use of the fact that they just wasted all their cooldowns to survive the graph. Of course, any experienced Genji player would have used this opportunity to cover the kill feed in their name, but considering my status as Genji novice, I was happy about just collecting assists without ending up eliminated myself. There are no two ways about it, the blue team was having a really bad time. Of course, only because your team has a great offense does not mean they can replicate that on defense. But considering what was on the line, you can be certain that Birdie was not planning to let go of the gas. This match was very unlike how our duo DPS adventures usually go. It is true that we typically win more games queuing individually, and needless to say that our recent track record wasn't the best. But hey, playing with friends is always more fun than playing alone, and evidently Birdie hadn't been winning a lot of games with or without me, so at least we get to suffer together. And suffer we would, because the blue team was not happy about how their defense went down, storming out the gates with a fury in their hearts that we would have to quench. iBot's approach to this first point attack was very different to how we were playing it before them, where we decided to go and to try and create an opening. They were waiting for us to make a mistake instead. Considering our hot-headed approach to this game, that wasn't an entirely unreasonable bet to make. A bet that would soon prove to resolve in their favor as Green couldn't stop himself from slamming down on the shift key, leaving us without our main tank. You know, it's always kind of funny when two teams face off against each other who are equally bad at defending. As much as our offensive styles were very different, it really comes to show that it takes entirely different approaches to succeed on either side of the match. And in this case, the blue team had steamrolled us off of the capture point while facing very little resistance. But unlike them, we didn't have the foresight to disengage early to take another fight as soon as possible. Green decided to take the hard-inting approach twice in a row, which means we might really want to consider a strategy that doesn't involve our Reinhardt. Well, that's a lot to ask for, so instead we awkwardly tried to poke out some more ultimate charge while waiting for Green to return. The possibility of the blue team snowballing us the way we snowballed them was solidly on the table, and if that happens, Birdie can say goodbye to his platinum rank, though he wasn't ready to admit defeat just yet.
Focus, Ryan, focus, Ryan.
Oh my god!
Oh my god!
Oh, that was bad.
Wait, give me my 6k! No!
Birdie may not have succeeded in getting a 6k, but that play might just have saved us from an impending snowball. Of course, he claimed that he deliberately timed his Deadeye to make that happen, but you and I both know that he was just lucky. Obviously, you can't win a match of Overwatch on the back of a single fight, so Green was trying to get creative and setting up a sneaky play for the upcoming engagement. Though he was not being quite as sneaky as he may have assumed with his golden hammer as well as his massive feat giving away his position. We had wasted our shadow to no avail, and wasn't it for our Zarya keeping the enemy team contained with a Graviton Surge, chances are they would have immediately pushed into the rest of us. Having gotten their Transcendence out was something that might be considered a consolation prize, but hey, I'm sure they would have loved to keep that one for my Dragon Blade, so not all was lost. On that same token, I'm sure they would have also loved to not waste their Graviton Surge, but I suppose that's platinum for you. Everyone's gameplay is full of holes that you can exploit. For the time being, our Brigitte was putting on her best main tank impression as we were waiting for Green to return, but it really felt like Ibot was not a big fan of not being able to take her out. After a futile attempt of shattering her followed by a lot of M1 swings that ended up achieving nothing at all, our Brig decided to show him the door. That was the second time he accidentally charged off the map, and I'm sure he was not happy about it. Simultaneously, I could use the Shatter as well as Transcendence-free environment to use my Dragon Blade and start picking off anyone trying to escort the payload. You can tell I'm still far from reaching Reddit levels of blade plays, but that's exactly why I'm in this rank. Anyway, Birdie and I were 1 for 1 in saving a teamfight each at this point, but we wouldn't be able to do any such thing on DPS without our ultimates, which neither of us had at their disposal. It didn't help that the blue team was changing their game plan, realizing that high ground was the key to victory for many a hitscan hero. One such hitscan hero was also getting absolutely outplayed by Ibot as Birdie's attempt of flashing over the barrier was negated. The enemy soldier now had absolute free reign over the battlefield, and obviously such a thing would be much more detrimental in higher ranks where hitscan aim is a bit more deadly. But either way, they were putting more pressure on our supports than was healthy. You might be wondering what I, the only player with the mobility to contest the high ground, was doing. Well, I forfeited the high ground early to focus the one isolated target. I did get baited in the sense that my Reinhardt initially followed along to help me, and Birdie was calling Mei out like he was still alive. Of course, I didn't have the skill to take her out all on my own, leaving me no choice but to scramble in an attempt of saving my life. As it turned out, Green left me alone for good reason, because their front line was looking heated. I am mildly blown away over the amount of times that the enemy Reinhardt should have been eliminated, but continued to get away with only a sliver of HP, either thanks to a stun, bubble, immortality field, and ultimately a nano boost. The blue team started tossing more and more ultimates into the ring, to which we could only respond by doing the same, and weren't it for Green successfully yeeting a fire strike into the Graviton Surge, chances are we would have lost to the enemy team's amplification matrix alone. The payload was left in a very convenient location for us as defenders. Whether the blue team chose to run through the castle or attack us head on, they'd have to cover a considerable distance to get there. No spawn advantage meant they needed to get a clean wipe on us to be able to capture the second point, and after how quickly we lost the first one, that was the sort of advantage we definitely needed. The blue team firmly held on to the idea that the high ground was the key to victory, but maybe they just approached it from the wrong direction. Rather than wandering through the castle, they took the side entrance, and this time they had a plan. The biggest difference between our teams up until that point was the usage of ultimates, but the attackers finally had some ults to combo, so all they had to do was get into position to make that happen. Unfortunately, the timing of these ultimates was a bit mismanaged as the Graviton Surge initiated a fight to which they didn't follow up. Ibot had used his fire strike just before the amplification matrix went down, and at that point they already wasted all the ultimates they needed to bring us to our knees. That high ground thing just wasn't working out for them the way they hoped. While Green was mopping up the few players that thought dropping down on their own was a good idea, Birdie traded some eliminations on high ground to stabilize our position before it was even threatened. Only few members of the team survived the onslaught, but with their timer running dangerously low and all of us being on high alert, trying to disengage would simply be too risky. They were definitely stuck between a rock and a hard place because Green was not about to let them sit up there. No, not only squashing their Baptiste but also going as far as solo ulting their soldier just to make sure they arrived late to the last fight. And well, that last fight really didn't go their way either. What appeared to be a meme play at first actually resulted in Baptiste and soldier arriving so late to the fight that everyone else was already eliminated by them. We had secured victory and ensured that Birdie does not drop to gold on my watch. Except that idiot went and solo queued after the fact and actually dropped out of 2500 just a few days later. Way to ruin the happy end there, Birdie. Way to ruin the happy end. I believe it is safe to say that all of us have found our nemesis in Overwatch. Just by the nature of a hero-based FPS, we're all bound to like and dislike some characters more than others. But a dispute that has been ongoing for an unreasonable amount of time is that between hitscan players and, well, everybody else. Whether you find yourself on the hero or FPS end of the hero-based FPS, I'm sure we all have a lot of opinions on why the developers should be catering to us more than our opposition. Listen, I enjoy clicking heads as much as the next guy, but aren't the heroes what make Overwatch unique at the end of the day? Today, my friends, I'm here to plant my flag on the ground. It's going to be me, the average projectile enjoyer, fighting against Mild, the hitscan fan, to answer once and for all why our side reigns supreme. But first, I have a bit of a confession to make. I will admit that I was fully intending on continuing the Genji saga, seeing as how learning how to play him on ladder has been really fun for me. However, my ISP strongly disagreed with that notion. Today, I'm going to tell you a story from my archives. No, not the archives event, I meant an episode that never managed to go into full production up until this point. So if you were ever curious about getting a bit of a behind the scenes glance on how these videos are made and what kinds of challenges I'm facing in trying to upload one of them every single week, this episode might be just for you. Also, for all of you big brain individuals out there who memorized every balance patch in the history of this game, feel free to leave a comment down below with your guesses on how old you think these clips are based on the heroes and some of the values you see on screen. I'm gonna reveal the answer at the end of the video. Now without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, our story from the archives takes place on King's Row. So then, some of you might be wondering, what is so special about this match that you decide to keep this on your hard drive all this time? Well, that's where the behind the scenes aspect of today's video immediately comes into play. Because you see, sometimes I'm blessed with getting more than just one story-worthy match in a session, and when that happens, I pre-record the footage to have it ready to go. Furthermore to the point, having video material in my backlog is a bit of a safety net for me when I'm working on sponsored content. Sometimes those videos take longer to make and I have less time to play the game to get more footage, in which case it is really helpful to already have some on my hard drive. This one specifically never made it into full production because I just kept getting other matches I wanted to tell stories about. And by the time I could have gotten around to it, Blizzard had updated the replay system, which means today's footage is a bit of a blast from the past. I mean, do you remember when I wasn't able to remove these bars up top? Or when the replay system randomly decided I could or could not turn off player outlines? There are gonna be a few such oddities throughout today's episode, but for the time being, it was my turn to attack, so let's find out what the defenders got to offer. Right out the gate, my distaste for the hitscan variety of heroes became very apparent as I decided to recklessly fire into the enemy Genji's deflect, resulting in the immediate elimination of our McCree. It was enough of an unfortunate start to make my tanks doubt their movement, unsure if we have the damage to back up a push or if they should play it safe and disengage. My Ana definitely had to work cut out for herself in the healing department alone, but not to be outdone by the damage I was dishing out, Suited still found openings to annoy the defenders with their Bionade. Frankly speaking, it was in big parts thanks to their performance that we had the confidence to continue fighting without a clean reset, which was important because Lord knows we'd immediately lose our opponent's respect if we tucked tail because of a single elimination. My prime directive was defending Suited while keeping my Discord uptime as high as possible. The enemy Genji Big Chungus must have realized that our support line was uncontested, but well, let's just say that his interference was not gonna change that. While most of us were securing the capture point, Snake was playing ring around the rosy with the enemy Sigma. I mean, I can come up with many scenarios that could use either of these main tanks to greater effect, but hey, who am I to tell them how to play their role? Snake eventually joined the rest of us for a celebratory victory dance, and while making sure we don't get full health is a great start to our offense, you know that when there's blood in the water, a snowball is waiting to happen. But seeing as how mild the enemy hitscan player didn't get to contribute much to that first fight, you know they were itching to make up for that. And the instant eradication of the hitscan counterpart would definitely be a great start for that. But they weren't the only one who had to make up for a mistake. So far, the only McCree I had eliminated was my own, so to correct that record, I ensured that Mild would find themselves eating dirt once more. Every elimination we obtained made us grow more aggressive, which which makes it ever the more surprising that the enemy Mercy got away with the res right in front of our eyes. Mild definitely had a chip on their shoulder after what I did to them, but little do they know that I'm more than willing to blow Transcendence just to stay in the fight. With my ultimate leading the charge, my tanks can unbind the S key and continue their advance towards the opposition, which I'm sure they were more than down for. Snake only knew one direction, which was forward, deleting defenders that desperately tried to stabilize with their ultimates, but all that to no avail. It really hammers home the concept of not needing a lot of healing when there are no enemies to deal damage to you, and with a remarkable amount of coordination backing up our plays, we had secured a lot of space. Meanwhile, on the flank, Big Chungus realized that I was well out of position, with the only thing keeping me alive being the pressure that the rest of my team put on him. He had no choice but to let me go and disengage completely, but not without a parting gift. I felt bad enough for Mike constantly getting eliminated because of my decisions, so before I endanger any more of my teammates, I made the call to return to the payload. Though it is funny that I survived every single one of these engagements when really I had no right to. Since I was now on the payload, Suited was pushing up to deliver healing in my stead, unfortunately becoming the target of Big Chungus' Dragon Blade, which, just a reminder, I could have countered if I had just taken the Elegance Mild after they had been revived. Another ultimate I could have countered was that incoming Gravitic Flux, though their Sigma made the mistake of targeting me with it, which, much like the Genji's dive, only had one possible result to offer. I do enjoy looking in my enemy's eyes before I eliminate them. After everything was said and done, we had absolutely steamrolled our way into the last stretch of King's Row. This was another reason I held off on making this episode, because as you can see, the pacing is a bit odd. Let's just say that a certain person on the enemy team was very fed up with how well we were doing, and sometimes a single swamp is all you need. With a strong foundation and a little bit of imagination, it just takes the slightest trigger to change a person. The unassuming Mild had been playing up to par until this point, but to have a chance of winning, it would take much more than the bare minimum. They immediately made their presence known by establishing hit scan dominance, and with a strong Widowmaker on their side, the defenders might just be able to transform the performance. Our Zarya made sure that Snake could return to the rest of the party without blowing up, but Mild continued hitting shots, which forced us to forsake the sightline they were holding. Any careless attempt of playing the game was met with brutal force, to the point where I could no longer rely on my own hit scan teammates to deal with the issue. My Ashe was making yet another bold attempt at contesting Mild, and while they didn't succeed, it did give me the opportunity to find an opening and take them out. Unfortunately, we'd already lost too many members of our team to continue pushing, leading me to call for a tactical retreat. My remaining comrades definitely agreed with that idea, and it was then that I received an unexpected comment. Oh boy, if Mild is under the impression that I was giving them a hard time up until that point, then they have no idea what's going to happen after that ego boost they just gave me. 6.5 minutes in theory should be more than enough time to build up an ultimate bank and win the game, but the real question to me was how often I could send Mild back to the spawn room before that happens. Our monkey boldly pushed into the defender's double main tank composition to initiate the next team fight, drawing the enemy team's attention on him to give us the space to do our thing. But determined to not allow us to pick up any momentum, the enemy Genji used the absence of our Winston to use his Dragon Blade early. My Transcendence may have helped with that, but unfortunately it couldn't protect my Ana from a headshot. Our Genji was making a valiant attempt at contesting Mild to make sure that our Ana did not die in vain, but that swiftly turned out to be more difficult than anticipated. Dash versus grappling hook mind games aside, having a pocket Moira simply wasn't fair, and as such, our Genji had to take the L. Man, you really gotta feel bad for the guy. Mild remained uncontested, and after a long streak of eating dirt, could now enjoy the liberating breeze of freedom. The defenders had grown more confident on the back of Mild's performance, and where initially they seemed to be no more than a pushover, they now began pushing us back into our spawn as they learned to rotate their ultimates in effective fashion. But the turning of tables was not complete until Mild finally got revenge on me, and with their team having solidly planted their flag right in front of our spawn, delivering my very first death of the game was only a matter of time. Is this it? Do the defenders finally have us beat? Did we run out of steam after having dominated this game all the way into the last point? Well, not if Mike has anything to say about that. While I was keeping our team alive via Transcendence, Mike was clicking one head after another, completely removing the enemy team's healing factor from the equation. If there was one thing that's on our side, it's speed, and using that momentum we stacked up to no less than 5 eliminations in no time at all. The cherry on top was Mike engaging and winning the 1v1 against Mild, completing the team wipe. It might not always look like it, but we definitely knew what we were doing. Our tanks were securing the high ground to make sure Mild can no longer pop heads for free, but considering how quickly we ended that last fight, we knew they were gonna come at us with all 6. We had to play it carefully. The strength of our dive composition was picking out isolated targets and dogpiling onto them, so if we want to take the W right now, we gotta find somebody who's out of position. And the enemy Zenyatta was just one such target. What we didn't expect was that the defenders met our diving attempt with a lot more force than honestly is reasonable. Their Zenyatta was taken out, but we too were bleeding manpower. So much in fact that at some point it became obvious that we wouldn't be able to overcome the defender's spawn advantage. Being the resourceful support player that I am, I made the decision to not feed any more ultimate charge and simply watch my teammates perish as I remain at a safe distance. Now some of you may have already caught onto something weird happening in this replay. Taking a not very close look at our surroundings, you can see a remarkable amount of Moira orbs just kinda suspended in midair. And while you might assume that they only appear as such because I stopped the replay, as you can see they remain in position even during active gameplay. This is one of the many things the replay system got better at over time. Sometimes when players toss out projectiles and you rewind, the projectiles get stuck in midair. Now granted, this does still happen in the current version of the replay system as evidenced by the last episode, but it is far less frequent than it used to be. Having two Moira players in a lobby was an absolute nightmare because I'd have to restart the replay every time that happens, which it really happened a ton. But back to the task at hand. This 7 minutes that we started with has since been reduced to a meager 2, and it wasn't for a lack of trying either. The defenders were putting all of their eggs into one basket, the name of which was Mild. None of us could find an opening to deal with them, and that meant one thing. If we can't take out Mild, we'll just have to take out everybody else. I've told you guys many times that overconfidence can be your downfall. When the enemy Moira pushed up with their ultimate, our Doomfist found an opening to take them out. However, we did not blindly jump at the enemies following that elimination. Our usual hard W approach has not been good enough for this last point, so this time we took it slow, waiting for the defenders to get antsy before striking once more to trade in our favor. Well, it would have been a favorable trade if Malt had not been enjoying their team's unimpeded support. Our Winston's solo dive was futile, and our Doomfist could also only do so much before getting eliminated. But suddenly, a light in the darkness. Mike had not given up just yet. Only because he was not getting a 5-man pocket does not mean he's a bad Widowmaker, and with that in mind, he equalized the engagement. I was once again delegated to payload duty, trying to find a way to play around sightlines, somehow heal my team, and yet not neglect the damage aspect of my kit. But eventually, I found myself overwhelmed with no choice but to pop Transcendence. Our team was painfully aware of Malt's impact on this match, so as soon as they stepped out of spawn, Doomfist and Winston came back with a vengeance to send them right back. Simultaneously, I had used the last couple seconds of my ultimate to reposition myself and was honestly happy about having gotten off the payload. My tanks could deal with that now, and speak of the devil, my Winston surfed me the enemy Zenyatta on a silver platter. Still upset about me having cancelled his ultimate on the second point, Dark Age the Sigma player decided to hit me one more time, except this time he will be the one tossing his orbs in my face as opposed to the other way around. The defenders had rudely ejected us off the objective with no more than 30 seconds left on the clock. 7 minutes really do go by fast when you do absolutely nothing useful, but now we had to deal with the fallout of our previous failures. We had no time for subtleties, no time for plans, and no time for any more mistakes. This was our final chance, and if we can't capture this last point, at least we won't go down without a fight. Our Doomfist immediately made his way into the high ground and with the help of my Discord orb deleted Malt off the map before turning his attention to the enemy Zenyatta. The defenders were officially in panic mode, allowing us to go for one last hurrah on the back of the overtime mechanic. Fittingly enough, just like we had stomped our way all throughout the first and second point, the final fight of this game was over in a flash. Victory may be ours, but what is the answer to the question we posed at the very beginning? Well, in a competition between hitscan versus projectile, the ultimate victor was team play. Sure, Mild was popping off a lot, but technically speaking, I eliminated them a lot more than they got me. But ultimately, Mild was right. My Discord orb enabling my teammates to deal with them really was the deciding factor, and as such, I cannot confidently say that one side is definitively better than the other. I guess it's for you guys in the comment section to debate that among yourselves. Oh, and also, this file had just celebrated its 1-year anniversary on my hard drive when I started making this video. So whoever guessed that, here are your bragging rights. I hope you guys enjoyed this video despite its very scuffed nature. Some things are unfortunately out of my hands and my internet connection just so happens to be one of them. But YouTube waits for no one, so if it is content they demand, it is content that they'll get. At this point in time, I'm asking myself a very important question. Who is truly at fault here? The one who trolls a competitive match of Overwatch, or the one who willingly indulges in it? By now it is very apparent that I don't necessarily play comp in order to get the highest rank I can, more than I'm trying to find story-worthy encounters. Seeing as how these encounters are far and few between, it isn't surprising that every so often, Birdie and I indulge in a bit of tomfoolery. I mean, who can blame us? We haven't gotten any new content in years, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So if you're trying to have a fun time, you're simply gonna have to do it yourself. With that said, today's story is definitely of one such case. It started off like a regular match of competitive play, but eventually we decided that it just wasn't spicy enough. Keeping our intro short and sweet, ladies and gentlemen, our story today takes place on Rialto. Now, having two degenerates on your team initially might seem like chaos waiting to happen, but despite popular belief, we don't enter a lobby with the intention of losing. As you can see, I'm playing my strongest role and character right out the gate, with Birdie trying to flex his main tank muscles, claiming it's his best role even though we all know that he's a filthy Reddit loser at heart. All I'm saying is that we are yet to find out if it's the red team that's going to give us trouble, or if we are indeed our own biggest enemy. So let's get the show on the road and see what fate has in store for us. Much to my surprise, the red team came out swinging with a Pharah that was not being accompanied by a Mercy. Considering the presence of a Widowmaker on our side, that shouldn't be something to worry about, but they first had to get into a position where they can contest them, meaning Overflow had free reign over the first fight. There was a very distinct difference in aggression between our duo and the rest of our team, because while all of them decided to back out in response to that Pharah, Birdie and I were determined to go deeper, which unfortunately did not end up too well for at least one of us. Losing your main tank a few seconds into your defense is bad enough of an omen to warrant a complete retreat towards your spawn. Obviously, we still had to continue pumping damage into the opposition to stop them from walking into us, but we definitely started this game off on the wrong foot. As much as our team was respecting Overflow more than was honestly warranted, our collective retreat meant we could re-engage in a hurry as soon as Birdie respawned. And with our main tank holding the door, a C-Tac could take care of that flying nuisance. The red team had a bit of a weird reaction to our counterplay, by which FLD, the Reinhardt player, decided that the best response to getting bionated on full HP was to full send it into the defenders, which obviously they were not going to survive. It was all elementary from here on out. C-Tac was going on the flank to find another angle as the rest of my team was cleaning up whoever refused to leave the payload. And while establishing Zenyatta dominance is something I seek out to do whenever possible, I should have really known my limits, because challenging a strong hitscan player with my overblown hitbox is rarely a good idea. Though I did relish in the fact that their McCree was not getting out alive, ultimately falling victim to a Venomine. I suppose you could say that all's well that ends well, but at the time, none of us had any idea that Overflow was sneaking around in our backline. A very unorthodox playstyle to say the least, but it appears as though they were setting up for a play. Meanwhile, in the front line, I had full confidence in Birdie's W plus M1 attitude to hold off the red team, continuously firing orbs into the opposition to scare them into submission. But then, during one fateful moment, Birdie decided to drop his barrier for a fire strike, allowing the enemy Widowmaker to take me out. Simultaneously, our own sniper was getting absolutely destroyed by Overflow in our backline, and as if losing our own Widow was not bad enough, they really seemed determined to remove every blue sniper out of the game by eliminating our Ana as well. We were getting systematically dismantled following that one mistimed fire strike, and while getting revenge on the flanking Pharah must have felt good, C-Tac simply could not compare to the sniping prowess of the opposition. There was absolutely nothing stopping the red team from picking us apart at that point, and while I do find my teammates' positioning in light of an extremely competent sniper very questionable, I do have to say that hitscan plays like that one aren't exactly common in these ranks, and it really was showing. Only few of us succeeded in holding onto their lives, and while just surviving is not going to win us this game, it is the first step to stabilizing your position and coming up with a plan of attack. One which we could really use right now. What wasn't helpful was our Widowmaker still trying to ego their opposition in what was very obviously an uphill battle. The red team continued to find openings and advance further, putting us in a very tough spot. If their entire strategy revolves around their Widowmaker, then taking away the high ground was probably our best bet. But Birdie found himself immediately contested by the enemy tank line, a problem that I, as a Zenyatta, might be able to assist with. Now, at the time, I was not exactly certain where Birdie had disappeared to, but I did hear the clacking of high heels on low ground, prompting me to drop down. Our team was engaging in yet unprecedented levels of feeding just to try and take out their Widow, but alas, they survived. And about Birdie, yeah, I'm sure he'd rather not talk about that, but he failed to charge his Reinhardt counterpart and ultimately went for a swim. Unlucky. We were getting team diffed by every single metric. The blue team just was not on the same page about anything going on in this match. Our Zarya was unsure about when to engage, our Reinhardt only knows how to move forward, our Widowmaker kept taking fights they rather shouldn't, and our Torbjorn was yet to make an impact. Not to mention that my flanks were absolutely futile, while my Ana was desperately trying to keep all of us alive, to no avail. As long as the enemy tank line can have their way with our team, there was nothing we could do to contest their Widowmaker, but their onslaught of ultimates continued to make sure that we never got to cleanly regroup, tried to gather our forces. We were trying to funnel our resources into Birdie in a desperate attempt of gaining ground, but it appears as though I was not the only one frustrated with the course this match has taken, because Birdie really made the impression that he just slammed his face on his laptop rather than actually playing the game. It was obvious that CTAC was unable to keep up with the enemy Widowmakers, so when I spotted the red trail of doom coming from the side, I decided to help them along. I had landed enough shots to take some heat off my teammates, but you and I know that this was not enough for either of us. With an unwillingness to take the L, both of us decided to fully commit to this 1v1 on the side. My Widowmaker might not be able to take them out, but that wouldn't stop me from trying anyway, even if that meant paying with my life. But as it turned out, just sacrificing myself to take out the Widow was not enough for us to stabilize. The red team had more than enough spring up their step to the point where just eliminating their carry was not enough to stop them. We had completely and utterly failed on this defense, which means that a change of plan was in order. You shouldn't be surprised to hear that so far in this game, we were not having a good time. There was a semblance of competence every once in a while, but by and large, we were getting absolutely rolled. It is worth mentioning that none of our teammates said a word in voice chat, meaning I'm hard-pressed to believe that any of them actually cared to improve their performance. I mean, heck, Arana just decided to swap to Widowmaker because apparently CTAC was not doing good enough of a job. Wait, did I just see that right? Yep, you couldn't tell that this was open queue up until that point, because for some reason, everyone seems to pick a standard 2-2-2 composition anyway, despite all that freedom that they are given. Hey, I said this was competitive play, I never mentioned it was role queue. Naturally, our team did what every team does when they are losing an open queue, which includes swapping to as many DPS heroes as humanly possible, believing that they can be the hero to carry this match. Before our attack round even started, I already knew that Otto was truly the only one deserving of the hero label, because even when considering their cowardly playstyle during our defense, they didn't succumb to the temptation of playing DPS. Overflow immediately tried to take control of the pace of the game once more, flying in from the flank to boop Josh off the map before returning to the supports. Birdie, finally playing the hero we all expected him to play, took it upon himself to contest Overflow since our myriad of hitscan heroes apparently didn't care to do so, and with him making for a worthwhile distraction, Josh was able to get his revenge. The payload was slowly, and I mean very slowly, advancing towards the first corner, though for some reason both attackers and defenders decided to inexplicably back out of the engagement. It truly was a weird sight to take in, but Ada was not known for his decisive plays one way or another, so I guess that was to be expected. Every opportunity that presented itself was met with indecisiveness to very frustrating degrees. It's not like the red team was that much better than us. I mean, heck, their Widow was barely doing anything for some reason, so we had every chance to make progress. But eventually I decided that enough was enough. I got nano once I see you.
What? Excuse me?
Yeah?
Give it. Come here, Widowmaker. You know what? I'll settle for the... Oh, never mind.
Oh.
Okay. I almost got this in.
That plan of ours definitely had a lot of potential, but the execution fell flat on its face. We continued losing squishies left, right, and center while I desperately tried to keep my Zarya alive in the face of an angry Junkrat. Otto and I were being hunted mercilessly, and in hindsight I should have really just let them take me out after I had enough of my healing darts eaten to lose my Zarya, but a bit of a saving grace was me being able to take out the Zenyatta, who now had to walk his low mobility self back to the front line. Birdie was trying to roll out of spawn in an attempt of speeding me back to safety, but instead accidentally backed out into the water. Unlucky. I gotta be honest, after our Nano Lucio strat failed miserably, I was kind of at wit's end. I genuinely felt like we exhausted all options to try and open up this game for our team, but what I didn't expect was that CTAG still had a chip on their shoulder. They might not be the carry we demand, but their opportunistic playstyle allowed them to pick off two very important targets. With these eliminations spearheading our advance, we still had a chance to avoid the embarrassment of getting full health on the first point. And as much as we succeeded in snowballing these picks into a total of 5 eliminations, we failed to kill the most important target. Their Widowmaker was still alive and kicking, meaning we got to overcome that challenge before we can call ourselves victorious. There was no ultimate too valuable and no play too risky when it came to contesting their sniper, but more than eliminating our entire lineup, they succeeded in buying enough time for the rest of their team to come back. It just was not meant to be that easy. Securing the first point meant we had to find it in ourselves to wipe their team once more, causing all of us to go into overdrive. Otto may be our only tank, but he definitely had enough courage for two. His plays were getting more bold as the game went on, and he must have realized that he has to be the pillar the rest of us can rely on. Once we had depleted our ultimate bank, there was no turning back. We had to force the opposition off the objective to stand a chance of keeping this game alive, and at long last, we had shown signs of life. But of course, if there was one person who would enjoy extinguishing the glimmer of hope that just formed in our team, it was the Widowmaker. It doesn't take a genius to realize that the sub-level 200 bronze border Widow Smurf was not meant to participate in this lobby, but complaining is not gonna get them to go away, so we just had to deal with that. Another thing I had to deal with was my ping spike spiking in excess of 300 MS. Yep, just the usual. Nothing weird to see here. Definitely not the reason I'm not playing rogue queue for this week's episode or anything. Once I was able to take part in this match without drifting into the 17th dimension, I found that our team's morale had greatly suffered as a result of the open sightline. Birdie claimed there was no chance we could win this game against that Widowmaker smurf, and even though the rest of our team was quiet, seeing as how they were playing, I had reason to assume that they were in agreement about that. Of course, I had no intention of trying to counter-snipe somebody who is obviously way better than me, but maybe, just maybe, I could serve as a distraction. If there's one thing you should never underestimate, it's a DPS player's ego. There's nothing worse for a hit scam main than admitting defeat in a Widow 1v1. So by channeling their frustration into their aim, C-Tech could make use of the distraction I provided to finally give us some space to breathe. And breathing we did, right down the enemy team's neck. Our window of opportunity was narrow and we had to make sure we could cover the bridge before the Widowmaker comes back. Featuring yet unprecedented levels of aggression, our team was running at the enemy Reinhardt in sheer disregard of the fact that we only had a single tank of our own. But who needs tanks anyway when you have testicles the size of Bobby Kotick's payout bonus? As much as I found Otto's increase in confidence commendable and definitely attribute our success at least in part to the transformation of his gameplay, maybe running towards the enemy spawn on his own was not what I would describe as a sound idea. Birdie, on the other hand, firmly disagreed with me and once again attempted to turbo int himself into the enemy Widowmaker at Mach 7 just to make sure that we aren't doing too well for ourselves. Thankfully, we still had Josh putting in 110% effort. I gotta say, I wasn't the biggest fan of his Ana performance on defense, so having him hold Widowmaker hostage was probably not helpful to our predicament. But since we had C-Tac back on sniping duty, Josh seemed to do much better in cleaning up kills whenever possible. Tensions were rising as overtime came closer and closer. The red team still had several of their members in our backline, but for now, we had to make sure that none of them could touch the objective, and while we did succeed, it did cost me my life. As much as capturing the second point was quite the weight off our shoulders, the enemy team's pincer attack was still in progress despite losing the Reinhardt. Otto and the rest of our survivors did whatever they could to try and keep the ball rolling, but unfortunately, they found themselves overwhelmed eventually. Also, a big shout out to Birdie, who apparently did not forget how to do rollouts at a spawn, but did forget that in this game, standing still does not automatically mean that the enemies can't see you. That was not our only problem though, because the enemy Widowmaker must have realized that there was a very real chance of them not automatically winning this game, resulting in them snorting a line of G fuel to continue putting us in our place. Of course, I was in too deep to disengage at that point, and since I had no mobility that could allow me to avoid getting staggered, the best thing I could do was fight for my life in the face of overwhelming damage. But as much as Birdie was responsible for more than just one death to my name, trust me when I say that he didn't mean to get me killed before, and in order to prove that, he was doing his darndest to keep the hyenas off of me. Though there's only so much he can do to keep me alive, and for some reason FLD was trying really hard to solo shatter me. When that failed and they were left with a choice between backing out or sending it, there really was only one right decision for a team that is currently in the lead. There's no way! What is this? What is this game, bro? The red team was firmly in control, and while we barely evaded overtime up until this point, there was no way for us to do so again. Everything was relying on a final push, but what waited for us was something we definitely should have expected.
No, Cliff!
We can't touch it! Wow!
Dude.
Wow.
I can't right now, man.
Dude, this feels like 2016 all over again.
Oh my god, what are we... Ooh.
I know that guy. And unfortunately, that is how our first game back into Open Queue ended. I don't know if mine and Birdie's shenanigans were truly detrimental to our success, but in our defense, if our team didn't want me to nano boost the Lucio, then, well, they could have said something. Since it already felt like our team had given up after our atrocious defense, I didn't really feel bad for indulging in silly strategies. And hey, it's impressive how far we got for a team that was about to be full health. And before you ask me if you can expect to see more Open Queue episodes on the channel, yeah, I don't think I want to play anymore. Yeah. Like, this just isn't fun.
No, I hate Open Queue. Jeez, that's so miserable.
Open Queue really does feel like a blast from the past, but frankly, I don't really get the point of it. Most games have every team default to a 2-2-2 composition anyway, the MMR is way out of whack, and as much as it was funny to win a game with me on Lucio as the only support, after 5 matches, it really gets tiring to have people argue about who is worse at DPS to determine who should be playing support. I just figured that if my internet randomly cuts out, I wouldn't care about losing 50 SR in Open Queue, which is the only reason I even gave it a shot. So yeah, don't expect to see it come back anytime soon. But that's it for our story here today. I hope you guys enjoyed this crazy filler arc of an episode, and if you did, do let me know by dropping me a like on your way out. Consider subscribing if you want to see more, and definitely ring that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, Peace!